Good morning and welcome to Joint Education. Chairman Scott, do you have any comments you'd like to make right off?
No, sir, not right off, but I will when we get to the first bill.
All right. Thank you very much. So can we have roll call, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brightman? Here. Senator Brennan?
She'll be late.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss? Here. Senator Steinmetz?
Here.
Representative Allred?
Excused.
Representative Andrew?
Here.
Representative Berger?
Here.
Representative Brown?
Here.
Representative Clauston?
Here.
Representative Lawley? Here. Representative Obermueller?
Here.
Representative Provenza?
Here.
Co-Chairman Scott?
Here.
Co-Chairman Northrup?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So first thing we're going to do is start off. There was quite a bit of information in the packet, a lot of answers to the questions that we had from the last meeting. Hope everybody had a chance to read that on the committee. And so we're going to dive right into early childhood. We have a full agenda today. We're supposed to be here till 6-ish or so. And so we're going to try to keep this thing rolling right along and be on time. So first off, we have is early childhood education, which is 25 LSO-0097 preschool kindergarten readiness with Talise Hansen. Good morning, Talise.
Mr. Chairman, while she's getting ready, just a couple of comments. This is a major reform bill, I think. And I would point the committee to the definition of kindergarten readiness and say to the committee and the audience that I think that's key, and not to put great stock in what's already there. We put in some things to get started, but we understood that there hadn't been agreement within the education community in the state on what kindergarten readiness was. And that's key to however you're going to do it, to doing preschool and doing it well. So that's something we'll really need to look at and probably need to modify. So I'd really point that out to the committee. And I would second say that part of the purpose here is to try to harness the private sector, because preschools are marketed, but there's no real definition of what they are. And if we can use the kindergarten readiness to define what a preschool is, then we can harness all that money that is now being spent in this area and get it put to better use, Mr. Chairman. So I think those are the keys to this bill before we get into technicalities.
Very good. Talise, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Talise Hansen, staff attorney, LSO. I'm presenting Bill Draft 25 LSO 97 version 0.5 preschool and kindergarten readiness. This bill draft was requested at the committee's June meeting. It requires preschools to be certified by the Department of Family Services, requires preschools to administer a kindergarten readiness program, and prohibits false or misleading advertising relating to preschools. So I'll start by walking through the bill draft. The changes on page 2, lines 9 through 22, amend the definition of child caring facility to state that a child caring facility shall not include a preschool, and provide some conforming amendments within that definition. Page 3 to the top of page 4 provides a definition of kindergarten ready to mean a child who is ready for kindergarten, who can verbally recite one or more of the child's parents' or guardian's names and identify one or more characteristics about the child's parent or guardian, demonstrate appropriate classroom behavior when receiving individualized instruction or instruction in a group setting, including being respectful of teachers and peers, peacefully resolve disputes and conflicts with peers, verbally recite the alphabet, identify upper and lowercase letters, verbally count numbers 1 through 30 and read numbers 1 through 10, identify primary colors and correctly identify a color with an object, and appropriately use writing instruments, including pencils. Page 4, lines 7 through 11 provides a definition of preschools to mean an educational program that provides instruction to children who have not enrolled in school and who are not less than 7 years of age. Preschool does not include a preschool program provided by a school district under Wyoming Statute 214302C. The staff comment on the bottom of page 4 to the top of page 6 states that the committee may wish to consider amending the definitions of kindergarten ready and preschool. The staff comment provides a few definitions of kindergarten readiness or school readiness from other states. The staff comment notes that other states have also taken different approaches instead of just straight out defining what kindergarten readiness is. These include setting indicators of readiness, which are measured by a kindergarten entry assessment, requiring the state education agency to set standards for school readiness, and authorizing the state board to adopt a definition of school readiness, but sets minimum requirements for that definition. The staff comment further notes that Wyoming Statute 214302E requires school districts providing a preschool program to assess through the 4th grade when practical the school readiness and academic performance of students who participated in the school district's preschool program as compared to those who did not. Before 2019, school districts used the instructional foundations for kindergarten, which was a kindergarten readiness assessment, to assess its students and reported these assessment results to the Wyoming Department of Education through the WDE 453 kindergarten data collection. The department was then required to report these assessments to this committee. In 2019, the Wyoming legislature removed the reporting requirements. As a result, the department no longer funded the assessment contract. The statute still requires the school districts providing a preschool program to assess the school readiness of students, but school districts may select their own assessment to meet this requirement. So that was just included for the committee's reference. Continuing through, page 6, line 23 adds preschools to 144102 subsection A, which requires preschools to be certified by the certifying authority, which is the Department of Family Services. Page 6, lines 28 through 31, adds a new subsection C to state that the certifying authority, which is the Department of Family Services, shall not certify a preschool unless the preschool administers a kindergarten readiness program designed to ensure children entering kindergarten are kindergarten ready. Page 7, lines 1 through 3, add a new subsection D to state that the certifying authority, which is the Department of Family Services, shall certify preschools in consultation and coordination with the local school district. Page 7, line 11 adds preschools, so the certification board is required to designate investigators to investigate preschools. Page 7, lines 15 and 16 add preschool programs and preschool licensing to require the certification board to act as an advisor to the state in all matters pertaining to preschool programs and preschool licensing. Page 8, line 2 adds preschools to require that applications for certification of a preschool shall be made to the certifying authority, which is the Department of Family Services. The staff comment on page 8 just provides some clarification for the committee that a preschool would still be required to comply with the provisions of Wyoming statutes 144101 through 144111, in addition to administering a kindergarten readiness program. Therefore, a preschool would be certified if a preschool administers a kindergarten readiness program and complies with the other requirements outlined in 144104B, which is provided in that staff comment. In addition, Wyoming Statute 144107 provides that all certified agencies and applicants for certification, which would include preschools under this bill draft, are required to be inspected, investigated, and examined by the certifying board. Wyoming Statute 144108 provides that any certification may be suspended, non-renewed, or revoked by the certifying authority upon proof of a violation of any provision of 144101 through 144111. So continuing through the bill draft, page 9, line 5 adds preschools to 144110 to provide that any person may be enjoined from operating a preschool for violating any provision within 144101 through 144111. Page 9, line 11 adds preschools to 144111, subsection A, to state that any preschool operating without certification is guilty of a misdemeanor. Page 9, lines 18 through 22, and page 10, lines 1 and 2, add a new subsection B, which provides that no preschool without certification or a child caring facility shall use false or misleading advertising claiming to be a preschool or claiming to provide preschool services. A violation of this subsection is a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment for not more than 6 months, a fine of not more than $750, or both. The staff comment on page 10 states that the committee may wish to consider amending the penalty provided in the new subsection B for false or misleading advertising. The penalty as currently drafted is the standard misdemeanor penalty. Page 10, lines 17 through 20, add a new subsection G to Wyoming Statute 21-4302 to provide that a preschool program provided by a school district shall administer a kindergarten readiness program designed to ensure children entering kindergarten are kindergarten ready as defined by the new bill. Page 10, lines 22 through 27, add a new subsection H to provide that no provision of law shall be interpreted to prohibit a child who is not kindergarten ready from registering in kindergarten or first grade in the public school of the state if the child is otherwise eligible to register. Section 2 on page 11 provides that this act applies to new preschool certification applications filed on or after July 1, 2027. Each preschool certified by the Department of Family Services before July 1, 2027, with a certification expiration on or after July 1, 2027, shall not be required to comply with this act until the existing preschool certification expires and the preschool files a certification renewal application with the department, and that at that time they'll be required to comply with this act. The staff comment on page 11 just provides some information for the committee that under the Department of Family Services rules, a current certification of a child caring facility is issued for a 1-year period, and upon the expiration date, a child caring facility may apply for renewal. Section 3 on page 11 provides rulemaking authority for the Department of Family Services. Section 4 on page 12 provides a split effective date. Sections 1 and 2 are effective July 1st, 2027, and sections 3 and 4 are effective immediately. The staff comment on page 12 states that the committee may wish to address how this act interacts with the Education Savings Account Act. The Wyoming Education Savings Account Act provides a definition of pre-kindergarten and requires the state superintendent of public instruction to establish a certification process for education service providers. The pre-kindergarten certification process must ensure ESA students at a minimum receive instruction necessary for preparation to enter kindergarten. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Talise. Any questions for Ms. Talise? Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
Couple of questions. One general question, I don't expect her to answer, but maybe some of the other witnesses will. On the staff comment on page 6, my understanding is that we had some testimony that the effect of the preschools, when you assess them, disappeared by about 4th grade, and I don't know whether that's true or not. So that's Mr. Chairman, a general question, really aimed at other witnesses. I'd like to have a discussion of that. And the same would apply on top of page 7, item D, saying that gets the local school boards involved in the certification of preschools. Is the general question, is that a good idea? Technical question, Mr. Chairman, on page 9, lines 4 through 6. Does that explicitly provide that the preschools have to comply with the child care facility licensure requirements as well? Is that the effect of that? Because that's an item I've been concerned about.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, that would be under 14.4.101, where on page 8, subsection A, where it says application for certification of a child caring facility in a preschool within 14.4.101 through 14.4.111 shall be made to the certifying authority. And then in the staff comment also provides that in subsection B, a certificate shall be issued upon compliance with the following standards. So those standards apply to both child caring facility and a preschool. And then a preschool under this act would also have to have a kindergarten readiness program. So preschools still have to comply with all of the other requirements in 14.4.101 through 14.4.111. But in addition, they also have to provide a kindergarten readiness program. So they just have one additional requirement.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
On page 9, the language or claiming to provide preschool services. Does this mean that a facility that is just a child care facility cannot provide preschool services at all? You know, could they provide some of those services, but not a full range? So they don't qualify as a preschool, but they are providing some of the services.
Go ahead,
What's the
please.
implication of that language?
Mr. Chairman, currently, as that subsection is drafted, it would prohibit a child caring facility from claiming to provide preschool services, but that is a policy choice for this committee to make if you would like to adjust that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
I would call the committee's attention to that. I think we need to modify that because I don't want to discourage the child care facilities from providing some of the services. I think what we ought to do is say they can't claim to be a preschool unless they fully are, but they could still provide some of the services without claiming to be a preschool.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think that's exactly what it does. It doesn't exclude them from providing preschool services. It just says that they cannot claim or advertise that they're providing that they are a preschool or providing preschool services. So it doesn't exclude them from offering some modicum of educational opportunity, preschool style, but they would not be able to advertise that. And I guess perhaps the concern of Co-Chairman Scott is that they can't claim to provide preschool services. But I guess the challenge there is how you would delineate that in advertising, that we provide preschool services would be read by an average person as being the same as we are a preschool. I don't think they would probably be up on the law in a nuanced enough fashion to understand that difference.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that's something the committee needs to think about.
Okay. Anything else, Chairman Scott?
Mr. Chairman, page 11, section 2. I don't understand the interplay on the dates there. It would seem to me that with the staff comment that DFS is licensing for a year and then you have a renewal, that we would, it looks to me as written, you've got starting July 1, 2027, you have the potential of the law not being in effect for the preschools that were previously licensed for a year, but that delayed effective date gives plenty of time to adjust to the new license requirement. I don't see any reason for the language that says that on or after shall not be required to comply with this act until existing preschool certification expires. Why can't they be required to comply with the act as of July 1, 2027? They've had a couple of years' notice of it.
Go ahead, Talise.
Mr. Chairman, that was in there for if So the first line provides that a new preschool certification application, so a new preschool, if they filed on or after, would comply with this. But if a preschool applied on May of 2026, they would be renewed, like they would miss that, like they would be renewed on May of 2027. Their 1 year would be up on May of 2027, not after July, not on or after July 1st of 2027. That is why that's there, because they're on a 1 year period, and maybe the Department of Family Services can help clarify exactly their time frame. But to my understanding, if they are applying in May of 2026, their 1 year wouldn't be up until May of 2027, and this wouldn't go into effect until July 1st of 2027. So they wouldn't have to comply until the following year.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think we can modify that so that as of July 1st, 2027, they all have to comply. I don't see any reason for this, the language is written, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Provenza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the section, that subparagraph B for the no preschool without certification, so the penalties, I'm curious if why we went with criminal statutes, I guess, instead of potentially a civil process. I don't know who we would hold specifically accountable for, like the preschool in a criminal court of law. So I'd be curious if there's ways that we can maybe refine this to be more subject to civil litigation and civil penalties rather than the criminal 6 months misdemeanor.
And I have a comment on that same subject, and that's that it seems like the first offense, you could have some lady who's had a preschool today functioning, and it's called Little Tykes Preschool. It may have a banner outside saying that. And if she fails to pull that banner down, she would be in violation on July 1, 2027. And I don't think that it's maliciously intent. Maybe she forgot it. So we just need to lessen that up on the first offense and just get it to where it's hey, don't do that kind of thing. There ought to be some way so that they're not get their hands slammed in the door the first time. So go ahead, Talise.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, subsection B was just a criminal penalty because subsection A is a criminal penalty, but that is definitely a policy choice for this committee to make. That's just why it is drafted the way it is.
Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little curiosity on this bill. So we have the Department of Family Services in charge of the physical safety requirements for these preschools. And then we have the Department of Education is going to be in charge of Superintendent's Office of the education piece. Do we see these as both departments have their own roles, or looking at your last comment, or is there a suggestion that maybe the Family Services takes over the whole certification process? So just trying to figure out how the relationship is, and maybe we'll hear from some of the other departments.
Go ahead, Talise.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, are you referring to the education savings account comment on the last?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, there are some policy options with that. That staff comment was just a flag that there's going to potentially be some conflict. So one policy choice that Co-Chairman Scott suggested was to require the certification of the kindergarten education service providers to be through the Department of Family Services to move them under this act instead of the Department of Education. But either way, there is a policy choice to make about there could be some conflict having Department of Family Services have some control, and then the Department of Education under the Education Savings Act doing those certification processes.
Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, this is probably just more of a comment and other witnesses can speak to it, but I guess
Pull the
I'm-
mic up a little closer if you would, please.
Thank you. I guess what I envisioned from our discussion at our last meeting was more of a, what I would call consumer protection type approach. And I think this goes a little bit beyond that, especially when you start about criminal penalties. So that might have just been a different view I had about it, but in terms of trying to protect parents to know what's being offered, and if it says it's a preschool, then that's what it's doing. But again, this may be something others need to speak to about the approach. It seems a little overbearing, especially on the penalty side, but even setting up more than I guess I imagined of just definitions of what is a preschool and what's not, and kind of enforcing advertisement and things, but that's, thank you.
Go ahead, Talise.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, this bill was drafted at the direction of Co-Chairman Scott, and I worked with him on it. But these are all policy choices that this committee can make to revise this bill draft, but that's why it's drafted the way it is.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
And one of the things we're doing here is we found in the, excuse me, some of the health licensing professions, we have said you've got to actually have the credentials to call yourself a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, but other people can do the same sort of things that you do as long as they don't call themselves that. That was how we dealt with overlapping things. And what it really is a truth in advertising. And what the concept is, I think, Mr. Chairman, that we're going to communicate to the parents that this is the kindergarten readiness is what a real preschool provides. If they say they're a preschool, they are providing that.
Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me. Go ahead, Senator Brightman.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. My question is, the decision to put the kindergarten readiness definition in Title 14, is there a definition similar or the same definition in the education statutes, or is this brand new and this is where it landed?
Go ahead, Talise, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, there is not currently a definition of kindergarten readiness anywhere else in the statutes.
Further questions or comments for Talise? You have one, Chairman Scott?
Mr. Chairman, just following up on that, the testimony at the last meeting was that we did not have in Wyoming agreement within the education community as to what kindergarten readiness meant.
Further questions or comments for Talise? Anybody? All right, we'll go to public comment then. Anybody like to comment on the bill? Well, there ought to be a couple anyway. Yep, get the departments, both DFS, WDE. We know him. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. Sarah Bieber, Casper. I like the idea of the bill, mandating having preschool be certified by DFS, and it ensures a level of quality and accountability. It supports parental rights by providing assurance that preschools meet specific criteria, safety, education, care, that reduces the burden on parents to have to verify those aspects independently. Certification aims to ensure the quality. It could also create barriers. Small communities, community-based preschools, home-based providers who may not have the resources to meet all of the regulatory requirements. It could limit parental choice, especially in our smaller communities, our rural areas, and our low-income areas. Parents may only have a few choices and be very limited on those. Informal preschools, those kinds of settings. Implementing a tiered certification system that offers different levels of certification based on the size, resources, mission of the preschool. A small home-based preschool could have a simplified certification process focused on essential safety and education standards, allowing to operate without the burden of meeting all of the requirements that larger institutions would be able to meet. Providing some support for those smaller providers, technical assistance, those kinds of things to meet certification requirements might help with that. Certification is important. I feel like the bill could also be further strengthened by incorporating clear limitations on the government involvement. The Department of Education is an elected position. However, the Department of Family Service doesn't have any elected positions. Incorporating those clear limits on government involvement to prevent excessive control. The certification process could include an appeals mechanism or an independent review board to ensure that DFS is not exerting undue influence or making arbitrary decisions affecting preschool operation, especially because we're trying to get into that private sector. The requirement for preschools to administer the kindergarten readiness program ensures that they're well prepared for school, aligning with developmental appropriateness. It sets clear expectations. I'm hesitant with a specific type or cookie cutter standards. Not all children develop at the same rate. They don't all do the same things at the same pace. They're very different. Having a way to accommodate for individual children in their development, keeping preschools focused on the individual children instead of a teach to the test mentality. This could be done by allowing parents to have critical input on the readiness program. Opt-in, opt-outs. What parts of the program do they want or do they not want? That can come in, there was numerous talk in the ESA bill about allowing parents to have certain controls in that aspect. And so allowing that with the parents in this would also give that kind of individual family preference. Prohibiting, I really like the prohibiting against false or misleading advertisement by preschools. That's a really good safeguard measure for parental rights. Consider a review process with that for disputes. So the smaller programs DFS could come back at them and say, you're not meeting these. Allow them to kind of argue that before any of these penalties are possibly put into place. Allow an independent board of DFS away from the Department of Education to kind of look at that and see if that's actually true. Offer waivers for certain requirements from this. Again, going back to those smaller communities. Minimizing the government, especially the bureaucratic processes in all of those private sectors. Professional development, those smaller providers, those smaller preschools, they definitely can struggle. We don't want to just align with the larger, more capable preschools or just the school districts. We want to allow that broad parents to decide what they want. And so allowing for support for some of the smaller ones to get that professional development that they need and don't incur additional financial burden is also just an idea I had. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So I missed your name and who you represent.
Sarah Bieber, myself, from Casper.
All right, thank you. And we'll let any questions for Sarah? Chairman Scott, please go ahead.
Okay, two questions. One's an issue that she raised, and the questions for the attorneys. If this were to pass as it is, what is the review process if a preschool says, no, we met the requirements, and the licensing authority said, no, you did not? What would be the current review process? Because the question, she's raising the issue, should there be a dispute resolution? What is there under the law if we pass it as it is?
Mr. Chairman, under 14.4.109, if there's a denial of certification An applicant may request a hearing with the Board of Review by serving proper notice to the certifying authority, which is the Department of Family Services. And then the hearing is conducted in accordance with the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act under 14-4109. So that would apply to the preschools if they are denied certification. But there's no appeal process currently for the part where she's talking about prohibiting false or misleading advertising. But there is already an appeals process in place for denial of a certification.
Okay. Second question, do you have any suggestions for modifying the definition of kindergarten readiness?
It needs some work. I like the academic standards, but again, these kiddos are just learning how to be little people, using the bathroom, talking to each other. I know adults that don't know how to appropriately deal with conflict, but to have that as a requirement for kindergarten readiness, that might be a little steep. I don't want to just focus on those social emotional learning or those, task-based things. I think we could strengthen some of the academic requirements. They have to have exposure to reading. They have to have certain levels of those. I think staying out of the growth and development aspect would be safer and allow parents to decide what meets their child's needs for that, because not all of our special needs kids are going to meet the same standards the same way with those kinds of things. They're not going to be able to deal with conflict the same way. But I also appreciate on page 10 where it says that they can't say that that child's not ready for kindergarten, that the parents, especially because a lot of families in Wyoming homeschool. And that kind of keeps some of this out of homeschool stuff. So if they go all the way through age 7 at home and they do their own preschool program, that child can still enroll in school without limitation. So that can't interfere with the homeschool safeties. So I don't, off the top of my head, have direct recommendations on that.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Sorry. Sarah, thank you for being here this morning, and I appreciate your comments, particularly concerning smaller rural areas in Wyoming, which happens to be where I represent people from, and the lack of childcare and preschool opportunities there. Can you help me understand how a two-tiered system might help that issue in particular? And then I have another question.
Go ahead, Sarah.
A tiered certification would allow, so if you have some of the bigger, so when you get into the school district, preschool, their certification is, they can meet all of those requirements. They can make sure they can do the testing, they have all of, all of that stuff that supports the teachers doing those things. Whereas the smaller communities that have the home-based or smaller ones, they have staff turnover, they have all sorts of issues that, but the parents like those programs. So if we have a two-tier or multi-tiered that focuses in on this program is certified as a home-based preschool program based on the things that it does meet. Not that it meets all of these standards, but these kiddos are going to be able to do colors. They're going to have the numbers. They might have some exposure, whatever. It would definitely need developed if it was going to be a tiered. I can't off the top of my head just throw out what that would look like, but I think that would better accommodate across the board that variety or that necessary for our smaller communities to be able to keep what they do have without pushing those ones out and just focusing on public education or the public school systems or the school districts to provide those services. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, it does. Thank you. A second question, you mentioned the ESA as it concerns kindergarten readiness and providing funding through the ESA. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, whether you feel that's a good idea, and if you see how you would see these things working together, especially as you talk about the tiered systems and matching up where again, we have a different entity making those decisions about how to work that together. So,
I think, well, there's a lot of, sorry, Chairman, Representative Lawley. There is a lot of overlap and interplay between all of the agencies. The Wyoming Department of Ed works with the school districts work with DFS. So there's already established, and then within those are committees and state committees and local committees that work with all of those entities. So I think that between DFS and the Department of Education, there's already stuff that exists that will help that are already in interplay, that it could be beneficial. Personally, I'm not a fan of ESA going towards preschool. We don't have compulsory attendance until 7 years of age. That's first grade. So I don't think that we need to be bringing that into that right now. I think that the subsidies and the things that we do have currently are enough to support a preschool or a kindergarten program. The subsidies for childcare that DFS provides could be looked at and see if we can't increase there at specific for these preschool programs or kindergarten programs separate from the ESA. I think that the ESA providing a way for parents to have that money follow their kids to the education that they want, we have to get it up and going and get it so parents are fluidly using it to accommodate what their values and their family believes, to get those kids educated the way that they want before we start looking at bringing our smaller populations into it. Does that answer your question?
yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Senator Brightman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sarah, if this bill were to become law as it is, would there be, in your opinion, would you be more or less likely to open a preschool in Wyoming?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Chair, Senator Brightman. Less, it's punitive, it's difficult, it complicates and brings in a whole another loophole of bureaucratic process that it's not motivating at all.
Thank you.
Further questions for Sarah? Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so I messed up. We should have had the departments come in and give their presentation, but Dr. Brown, all right, that'll work. So can we have WDE come up? Whomever is here from Department of Education. Add your 2 cents to this because you heard some of the concerns already. Kenneth, it was a good segue into having you guys address the bill, if you would, please.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. And I'm just going to ask if Chief Shaner is potentially online.
He is not online currently, no.
Okay, I think at this point, our agency is not taking a position on the bill, but that we are eager to work with our sister agencies in the implementation of whatever might come to fruition.
All right. So then let's hear from the Support Services Division of Wyoming Department of Family Services. And Department of Health, if you'd like to come up, we just will line everybody up and see if we can get through the bill. So Roxanne, if you'd like to go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Roxanne O'Connor. I'm the Support Services Senior Administrator for Department of Family Services. Just as a little bit of level setting, and Representative Clauston, you kind of mentioned this, currently within the Department of Family Services, our licensing standards really focus on health and safety, right? So as a requirement of our Child Care Development Block Grant, we have health and safety standards that we need to license to. Those health and safety standards include square footage measurements, they include playground safety, they include staffing ratios and group capacity, staff credentialing from a background check perspective. And they also include partnerships with the Department of Ag and the Department of, or local health entities from a sanitation perspective, and from a fire perspective as well, from a fire inspection role. So we see health and safety as a foundational element of quality, right? It's your basic level of quality in any program. Another requirement that we have through the block grant is consumer education, like Representative Lawley mentioned. So we are required through our block grant to post and provide parental education to all licensed child care programs in the state. We have that on a registry where families can go, they can search for their specific needs in childcare, and they have one place that they can go and find those different types of programs. And programs can come in and they can adjust their profile, if you will, to say, this is who we serve. If it's a specific type of population that they serve, they can notate that so that parents know whether or not that they fit the criteria and whether or not the program meets their needs. This bill essentially would add another layer to that consumer education, the way that we read it. And so this would say, okay, DFS, you've come in and you've said that the health and safety standards are met from a licensing perspective. Additionally, if a child care program calls themselves a preschool, then we would also go in and say, do you meet the kindergarten readiness criteria as lined out in the bill? And I see that as being a licensing role where licensors would go in and they would ask those very questions. Do you have curriculum that meets the standards set out in the statute? And if they say yes, we say, okay, you're calling yourself a preschool, you meet these criteria, we will essentially provide this certification as well. And then we will apply that to your profile from a consumer education standpoint. So we read this bill from a pretty technical perspective. It's kind of a, do you meet these criterias, similar to do you meet our rules from a health and safety perspective as well. And we can go in and we can ask those questions. We can provide technical assistance to be able to help providers determine whether or not they meet that. I do think that, keeping in mind, we've not licensed programmatic programs or functions up to this point. And we've also not really evaluated or assessed programs for quality. We know quality, we see it each and every day because we're in these programs and we help to elevate quality in these programs, but we don't have indicators that say you're a 5-star ECE provider or you're a 3-star because you have these non-compliances or whatnot, and we're gonna help you elevate. And so this is a new realm for DFS to look at, really kind of delving into the programmatic lens for these childcare programs. And I do think that we would have to work closely with the Department of Education to make sure that we are looking at the criteria appropriately. But I think that it's something that we can do, again, if we look at it from a pretty technical perspective. A couple of additional comments that we have specific to the bill. We agree with the staff comment on page 10 and 11 regarding the educational savings accounts. Right now, we are working closely with the Department of Education. I sit on the council for the ESAs. And we know that with this bill being taken into consideration and with the timing of the ESAs, which is set to go live in January 2025, there's going to be a little bit of a timing issue in regards to the Department of Education needing to ensure that there is a pre-K standard or definition for the ESAs, and then potentially this bill going into effect a couple of years later. And so that's where we would really look to the committee for some potential alignment or some guidance on how how that can be accomplished from just a timing perspective and a consistency perspective, mainly for the providers to ensure that we have a cohesive approach to this at a state level. Additionally, Chairman Scott, you asked the question about consulting with school districts. You can see that on page 7, line 1. It states that the department shall coordinate and collaborate with local school districts. We are looking for some clarification on the committee on exactly what that looks like. Right now, as the bill reads, the kindergarten readiness criteria is fairly clear. And I think that, again, we can go in and we can ask providers if they have curriculum that meets that criteria. I'm not sure that we would need to have that collaboration or that collaboration from the school districts to fulfill the letter of the law that's in the bill right now. If there's additional intent or an additional goal in regards to why we would collaborate with school districts and what that means, certainly the department is open to hearing that feedback so that we can make sure that we would carry out the law per the committee's intent. And I think that addresses the feedback that we have. There were a couple of questions that LSO did a really great job on answering. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that I could provide a better response, but there was a question about the renewal dates for licensure and why we would have essentially almost a grandfathering approach to the preschool certification. And Ms. Hansen responded really well. We have a 1-year renewal process. And so we have a cadence and a calendar that we follow in regards to when we go and renew licensure for childcare programs. And so if there was a program who was wanting to call themselves a preschool in May of 2027, before the bill went into effect, we wouldn't have authority to even ask those questions as to whether or not they're meeting that criteria. We would be back in their program doing their renewal in May of 2028, and that's when we would ask those questions. So it really is falling in line with the process that we have for licensure renewal. And then Ms. Hansen also responded really well in regards to what our appeal process looks like in the certification board. We have that in place now for any potential noncompliances that we cite in childcare programs. Those can be appealed. They go to a board of about 7 members. That board is made up of early care and education providers themselves, a representative from the Department of Education, a representative from Fire, a representative from Department of Family Services, and they review that potential noncompliance. They hear from the providers, they hear from the department to then make a determination on that noncompliance. So we have that process, we respect that process, and I think that it is a healthy way to make sure that we are applying our rules in a really fair way. I think, the last comment in regards to civil penalty versus criminal penalty, right now, I kind of align that with what happens right now if you say that you are a childcare provider and you're not licensed and you're supposed to be. Right now, that's a criminal penalty as well. We typically go in from a Department of Family Services perspective and say, hey, did you know that you're supposed to be licensed? Did you know that there's laws about this? How can we help you get to that point? So when we hear of illegal operations, we don't make a call into law enforcement right away. We go and we say, here, let us help you get to the point where you can be licensed. What technical assistance can we provide to you? And we would likely want to take a similar softer approach when it came to preschool designations as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Connor? Let's hear from Senator Rothfuss first. Go ahead, sir.
Chairman, a couple of questions. First, on the last point, and the way statute's currently structured, it says any child care facility operating without certification is guilty of a misdemeanor. And as I was thinking that through, I really don't necessarily understand how that would play out, where you've got a facility that is guilty of a misdemeanor. I don't know who you handcuff and bring in when you're deciding to charge them. Yeah. Representative Provenza suggested maybe the preschoolers. I'm not sure. If we're bringing this up, maybe there's some cleanup that we could do there. And I don't even know how you all interpret that. I could imagine, if it's an LLC or something, who do you pick to be the criminal? You technically want the facility to be responsible, and you probably want something more like a civil fine, a civil penalty, instead of an actual crime in that circumstance. Is that something that you all have talked through or run into problems with, how that is actually carried out?
Go ahead, Ms. Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, thank you for that question. Yes, I will say that even right now, and like I said, I apply it to kind of the illegal operations from a licensing perspective. Law enforcement doesn't really see this as much of a priority, given some of the other things that they have to focus on, and I think that that's understandable. And so rarely do we look to law enforcement to assist with this. We really do and try to work with the provider to help get them to where they need to be, and at least provide them with education on where they need to be in accordance with the law. But when we have attempted to call law enforcement, again, they have much more intense situations that they're dealing with. And I think that where that lands on the priority list for them is probably lower, unless we have some imminent health and safety issues that we can let them know of.
And Mr. Chairman, on that, would it make more sense to set it up or create some civil penalties so you actually have an enforcement mechanism? You've got a potential for a stick, but a stick that works instead of having to call the cops and have them show up.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, we'd be open to exploring that.
I was going to switch, but it sounds like, or it looks like Senator Scott wants to ask.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, follow up on that. We have, since time out of memory, we have been putting criminal penalties on corporations. And typically it winds up as a fine. You sometimes, I suppose, can prosecute somebody within the corporation who knowingly violated something. But typically, it winds up as a fine. These minor things, we have them all through the statutes applying to corporations. And you get a fine or you get an injunction, is the way it works. So this is not anything particularly novel.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
On that, if it doesn't work, though, it doesn't work, and we could explore alternatives if they're struggling with that as the mechanism, which I think is reasonable. The other thing that I wanted to ask about with regard to the ESA is the process that's currently underway, where I know that high-quality preschool or pre-kindergarten is part of the legislation that was passed, and that you have a working group looking at that. Can you talk just a little bit about how that process is going? Because I do think it's important that we not screw that up. And I'd like to know, I assume you're bringing together experts and trying to figure out what best practices are available for evaluating a high-quality pre-kindergarten. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going?
Go ahead, Mr. Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, I'm happy to talk about what I know. Certainly, if Department of Education would like to fill in any gaps, I'm welcome to that as well. So we've had a few council meetings. The Department of Education is in the process of promulgating rules. They're in the process of promulgating RFPs from a program evaluation standpoint, and then also in the process of hiring a couple of staff that were appropriated within the bill from a financial perspective, and then also from a programmatic perspective. On the council, we have representatives from the University of Wyoming, the Early Learning Division or Department, who provide some really great feedback in regards to educational standards and what that should look like. We also have kindergarten teachers represented on that council as well to really lean into their expertise on what kindergarten ready looks like and how that should be applied to the educational savings account. And so to your question about, do we have expertise? Yes, I think that we do, and it's a matter of bringing the programs together, the departments together, and making sure that that feedback is then incorporated into the ESAs that are going to be rolled out here in the next few months.
Go ahead, follow up.
And do you anticipate the product of that being some sort of an accreditation where an entity hopes to be eligible to receive ESA credits for pre-K, and they would have to apply, or they would have to somehow go through a qualification process? How would the state evaluate whether an institution is eligible after this is up and running?
Go ahead, Ms. Conner.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I might ask the Department of Education if they're able to speak to that, just because they've been more entrenched in the rulemaking process.
Anybody else have a question for Ms. O'Connor? Go ahead, Senator Scott. Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, page 7, lines 1 through 3 on the consultations of the school boards. My note on that is a question: is this a good idea? Did I understand your testimony correctly that you could function perfectly well if we removed this requirement?
Go ahead, Ms. Conner.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, yes, I believe so, right? If we get into this, if the bill were to pass and we start to apply this type of certification, and we need to lean into our sister agencies, the Department of Education or the local school districts, we will do that. I just don't know that it has to be prescribed in a bill for us to do that.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Second question, page 7, line 8, says the board shall, this is in 14.4.103, is that the DFS advisory board? What board is that?
It's a certification board.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, that's the child care certification board. So it's not the DFS Advisory Council. It is the child care certification board. It's the board that I mentioned has about 7 members made up of Department of Education, provider representation, fire, and DFS.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Clausen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Peters, or Ms. O'Connor, right? Looking at the definition for readiness, kindergarten readiness, is that a definition your council of experts came up with, or do you know where this definition came from? So I'm looking at kindergarten ready means a child is, so that's on page 3 and 4.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, no, that is not something that DFS provided any information on in regards to the definition of kindergarten readiness.
Chairman Scott, would you like to?
Mr. Chairman, let's be clear about what this is. This is a series of recommendations that I came up with to have something to work from. And it's one of the reasons I called the committee's attention to this initially. We need to refine this definition. It is not an expert definition. And we're trying to just put something out there to tell the education community, come up with a better definition, or else we'll enact something.
Go ahead and follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when your council for the ESAs met, have they talked about the definition that they're looking at? I mean, we're looking at some early childhood experts, so have you guys worked on a definition that maybe we could use?
Go ahead, Ms. Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, so yes, we are looking at trying to define a kindergarten readiness definition. And really that conversation lent itself to leaning into the kindergarten readiness definition that the Early Childhood State Advisory Council developed through the Preschool Development Grant, I want to say a couple of years ago, and really trying to ensure that we're utilizing the work that was done by a number of representative agencies and experts to then apply that to the ESAs.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can you provide that definition to the committee?
Please go ahead, Ms. Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, yes, we can provide that. And I also know that there are some other individuals in the audience who's able to bring that up in conversation as well.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Ms. O'Connor? All right, thank you very much. Mr. Petrie, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Matt Petrie. I'm the Senior Administrator of the Behavioral Health Division for the State Department of Health. We, of course, one of our 4 major programs in the Behavioral Health Division is the Early Intervention and Education Program, which serves children birth through age 5 with developmental delays. Those children are served in an environment labeled as the least restrictive environment, and so they are served, especially in ages 3 through 5, in an environment where they are with what we call normally or typically developing peers. And that's probably the overlap, if you will, between the Department of Health and this bill is the population of children that are served, ours, of course, statutory, and the population of children that are served very well defined. Aside from that, the Department of Health does not take a position on the bill itself, but we would be more than happy to field any questions you may have.
Chairman Scott, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, your population of developmentally disabled kids, that will include some that are not mentally and physically capable of some of the academic requirements that would be in pre-kindergarten readiness. You're selectively serving a population that cannot do some of these things. Would the sensible solution to that in this bill be an explicit exception that this does not apply to those preschool developmental disability programs? And basically the reason for doing that was you're dealing with a population that is different from the average population.
Go ahead, Matt.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, I think the short answer to that question is yes. What we have in place for the child development centers that we contract with to provide services to these developmentally delayed children probably exceeds what you see in this bill, certainly for those children. There's overlap, so there is some redundancy here. Though I think that the CDCs themselves will still be considered preschools, so those aspects of this bill that are superseded by the requirements for developmentally delayed children would certainly apply to those typically developing peers that are also served in those child development centers.
Further questions for Mr. Petrie? Comments? Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Hamill, can you enlighten us about how WDE is coming on along with the rules of RFP and staffing to define a high-quality preschool, please?
Mr. Chairman and Committee, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. It appears as though Ms. O'Connor did a fabulous job of explaining the work of that committee, and that the hope is to establish that kindergarten readiness criteria for the ES program over the coming months. We do anticipate that it will be like an accreditation process of sorts, and that the criteria is being developed by pre-K experts that are sitting on that committee.
Excellent. Anybody have any questions for WD? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Shelley, for that. Would you expect by our November meeting that you would have something preliminarily that we could look at? Because it seems to me you're kind of ahead of us on that for the purposes of the ESA, and it might be helpful to have the insight of the work that's been done by that group. So I'm just curious if there is a chance when we have our November meeting, we could have a preliminary draft of what you're looking at, the process and the elements of that to aid our work if this bill goes forward.
Go ahead, Ms. Hamel.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Lally, I believe that that would be an appropriate request. That gives us a couple months to wrap that up.
Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead, Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, if this bill were not to make it, would the ESA money still be able to be used for pre-K without this bill?
Can you answer that? Go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman Northrup and Senator, do you mean the ESA early childhood, the ESA money for early childhood, or do you mean different early childhood monies?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the bill we just passed. I can't find the name, House Bill 166. And it talks about pre-kindergarten. It gives a definition of pre-K, what that ESA money could be used for. Is this what this bill is intended to do, is provide clarity as to what that means? Or can the ESA money flow to pre-K now without this bill?
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that question, but I believe that the way that the current statute is, just as you read, that the reason that the committee is working on that definition is because it's anticipated that funds would flow to that early childhood opportunity, that setting. Potentially LSO could clarify that.
Chairman Scott, you have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the bill that we passed can stand on its own. If we were to pass this with a definition, we probably should apply it to that. Otherwise, we'll have the definition that is developed by the bureaucracy appropriately in Department of Education and whoever else is on your committee. So that's a policy choice we'll have to make. But if we pass this, it probably ought to have the same definition as is used for that other bill. If we don't pass it, the other bill will depend on, I don't think the guidance, as I remember the legislation, the guidance wasn't very specific as to what needed to be in kindergarten readiness there. So we'll be relying on the agencies to develop that.
Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Shelley. So looking at other states, the Department of Education sends out pre-kindergarten materials to any certified preschools that ask. Are we currently doing that in Wyoming, or do we have a curriculum that we could share with these preschools?
Go ahead, Shelley.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen, the state of Wyoming, the Department of Education does not have a curriculum that we provide to preschools that might request that. As mentioned earlier today, there are early learning standards that were developed by, under the direction of the Early Childhood State Advisory Council and in conjunction with the University of Wyoming, that are available. We do have on the WDE's website the kindergarten transition supports that were also developed by that same council in support of that work.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Shelley. Could we have the people from the National Institute of Early Education Research, or NEAR?
Mr. Chairman, did you want to finish taking public comment on the bill?
Okay, we can do that, or, yes.
Because those are just two separate agenda items.
Okay. So let's do that. Let's finish, thank you. Let's finish the public comment. Anybody else have anything? Good, Dr. Brown. Anybody else besides Dr. Brown? Please fill the chairs up so we can move along, please. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. I do understand the need for the legislation to separate preschools and daycares for the educational savings accounts. My concern is that the definition of kindergarten readiness is placed in the statute. I think Senator Beitman had a good point about possibly having a problem between Chapter 14 and Chapter 21. I suggest the list of kindergarten readiness requirements would be more appropriate in rules and regulations. There are currently definitions of kindergarten readiness, and they're working on more, just as you just heard from the Wyoming Department of Education. If it's in statute here, it may affect K-12. I don't think this definition has addressed students with IEP students, and our developmental preschools also have regular ed students for least restrictive environment, so I think it may be an issue for that. Kindergarten readiness has changed a lot over the last few decades, and I think it would be easier to be addressed in rules and regulations. My suggestion would be that you delete pages 3 and 4, large letter A through H, and replace with that the Department of Family Services will promulgate rules and regulations on kindergarten readiness, including students on individual education plans. The other comment that I would make is that on page 7, letter D, it talks about school districts being part of the certification process. It would be fine with, if that were removed, districts do not feel qualified to be part of the certification process, but we would be very happy to consult with the Department of Family Services on anything that we would need to do with that. If we had local kindergarten readiness assessments that they needed to have, we would be happy to do that, but I don't know if we are the right person to certify a preschool. And with that, I'd answer questions.
Questions for Dr. Brown? Go ahead, Senator or office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Brown, just at a high level, do you think this bill is necessary at this time?
The only reason I think that we have the bill is to delineate daycare and preschool for the educational savings account. And again, I'm not an expert on that. My assumption is the money could flow without that. But again, I'm not an expert.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for Dr. Brown? Thank you, sir. Please state your name and who you represent.
My name is Mary Schmidt. I am a current Board of Trustee here at Natrona County, but I am not speaking on behalf of the Board of Trustees. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. One of the concerns, and I've expressed this before, the committees before about the ESA, is that this bill should have really stayed focused on the compulsory age of education and not have gone outside of that. That is really all it should have covered. And part of the reason for that is that kindergarten readiness, yes, as now that you have put that into the bill, now you have to regulate it. But the problem is there's no teeth to it, because no matter what you do, a public school will not turn away a child. Whether they're ready or they're not ready, whether they meet the standards you set here or not, every public school will take the child, because that's what our Constitution says that we have to do. So readiness is really an irrelevant term. And what you're doing is now creating a bureaucracy for the preschool and the daycare, which is really what we're talking about. Are we going to governmentally fund a preschool or a daycare? And that's really where I think most people were pushing the ESA to cover, to help those families that need to have their children in that. A preschool, the difference between a preschool and a daycare is the academic element to it. If you start regulating that, now that's going to add costs to the preschool, which is going to eliminate accessibility to lower income families, which I don't think is the intent. So I think you should really just leave the preschools and the daycares alone, and if you want to fund them, then fund them. But the problem with this ESA bill is that there's a lot of complaints that it funds religious schools. So now are you going to turn away religious preschools? Because that's what you're going to be doing, because you're not allowed to fund those. So those will now be eliminated from that. But parents may want to choose that component, because that age of 3 to 5 years of age is where we develop a child's character, morality, that type of thing. And if a parent chooses to have a religious institution instill those in them instead of a government institution, should we not allow that? And secondly, is it your job as a government institution to give direction as to how a child's character is formed and developed? Or should it be allowed for the individual preschool and daycare institutions to determine how they want to do it, and then the consumer, the parent, determines which ones they want to participate in? So having this government overreach, tying it to strings and regulations is really limiting families' options, and you are alienating the lower income families. And I don't think that's your intent, and I really think that if you're going to have a readiness standard, then you need to tell the public schools they can't allow a child to come in if they're not ready. Because in our district, we assess every incoming kindergarten student, and then we determine where they need to be placed. Is that not where our local control where that should remain? Now you're taking that away from us, because now we have to change that whole program because you're going to do some statewide standard. And again, isn't education supposed to be locally controlled? Let us do it, let us deal with it, because we're not turning them away regardless. And we've got an established system here, so let us deal with it. Thank you. I stand for any questions.
Questions? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I just want to clarify something, that this bill does not have anything to do directly with the ESA bill. This is a bill about, just to be clear, this is a bill about consumer protection, at least in my view, so parents know when they're choosing something that says it's a preschool, what they're getting. So without this bill, the ESA still goes on, because the work of certifying those things for the ESA has already been done under the bill at the direction of the department. It was just described to you, that process. So I just want to be clear about that these are two separate things. I don't necessarily disagree with some of your comments concerning what this bill is doing, but I just want to clarify, it has nothing to do with the ESA bill in that regard. It has to do with consumer protection for any parent choosing something called a preschool, and kind of having an understanding of what they're getting when they do that. So that, I think, needs to be clarified, because it's been brought up and people said, well, no, yeah, I don't know. But I will tell you, as one that was part of the adoption of the ESA bill, that this does not affect that. Now, if this were enacted, we're going to have to see what the difference might be and what the departments, the work they've done in this area. But this bill goes away, that work's still being done under the ESA, so that bill has already passed into law. So just to clarify that difference, I think for everyone it might be helpful, so we get through what this bill's about and not get on something that's about a bill that's already in law, that we may can take up another time, but it's certainly not today. But that's my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the clarification. Go ahead, Mary.
Chairman Northrop and Representative Lawley, I agree that they are separate bills, but they do interchange, because you have an ESA account that allows for preschool, and if you're going to regulate preschool and put in rules and how it has to be marketed, then you're going to say that that ESA money can only be what the government's allocated or what they've regulated preschools to be. And so, I mean, you can't take the ESA money and go use it for a religious preschool if they meet all of your regulation standards, but they have a religious component. Can you use that ESA money for that?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, the ESA bill already has a component for determining eligibility. That's what they're working on, and the department's doing that. And that is what will determine whether or not and the ESA money can be used or not. So what I would just say is not necessarily, I do agree that this could cloud that could create some confusion in that. But it's not the same thing as saying this would rule over that. That doesn't say that here. And my view is it doesn't unless we say it does. But again, not that you haven't raised some flags, because I think you have, but I think it's, the ESA bill stands on its own, and it's not even a bill, it's the law right now. And that's already in place, and all of that work will be done before this bill would ever even see the light of day. It's based on the date that it's implemented. And so, again, until we decide those things, and as I said, we already asked the department for information concerning their work by our next meeting, so we have an understanding of what they're doing. But again, I'm just trying to get the comments down to this bill and what it does or doesn't do, and I think there's a little bit of confusion on that. So again, thank you for being here.
Chairman Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, a question for the staff attorneys, and one of the issues that were raised, the question was, would this lead to discrimination against religious preschools? The precedents from the U.S. Supreme Court, where they ruled that there couldn't be discrimination if you allowed funding of private institutions, you couldn't discriminate against religious ones. Are those precedents such that they would apply to this circumstance?
Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. I think that's a different question that's being asked. In the ESA bill, it's pre-kindergarten. The term pre-kindergarten is used, and those are certified by the Department of Education. That is the testimony that you just received from the Department of Education. This bill attempts to regulate private businesses, to Representative Lawley's point, as a consumer protection piece. That's my understanding as to the policy choice that was made by the committee at the last meeting. That was a directive to staff. I don't think it unilaterally discriminates against religious preschools. I don't see anything in the licensure statutes that would lend itself to that interpretation. I would defer that question to Talise. But to your specific question, those are two separate and distinct items. The education savings account and this bill are two separate policy choices that the legislature, one, has already made on ESAs, and two, is considering a consumer protection provision in this bill. And I don't disagree that there is some nexus. We discussed that with you, Mr. Chairman, that there could be some interpretation differences between using those two words, because you're using pre-kindergarten and preschool. Those are two very close words. The only instance where pre-kindergarten is used in Wyoming statute is in the education savings account bill. That's it, or law, excuse me, law.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
That wasn't quite the question. Do the Supreme Court precedents prohibit us from discriminating against religious institutions with a bill like this one?
Mr. Chairman, would have to look at that case and get back to you. That bill was specific to vouchers and specific to K-12 education, not specific to preschool regulation.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mary? All right, thank you, Mary.
If I may just say one more thing, Chairman Northrup, is that I understand they're separate bills, but they do cross. They've admitted that there is, and I think that's something you have to take into consideration when passing this bill, is how much overlapping, how much confusion will the two cause together? There's already enough confusion with the ESA. Now you add this into it, and are you making Wyoming citizens' lives more challenging unnecessarily? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman Northrup, Chairman Scott. My name is Alicia Rowan. I'm the Executive Director of the Child Development Center here in Casper, Wyoming, and we actually just received Wyoming's best preschool in the state and Natrona County's best preschool, which I'm pretty proud about. We serve 700 children right now, ages birth to 5. And one thing I wanted to comment is on, the standards of kindergarten readiness are ever changing. And I think we're really dealing with two things here. I appreciate us wanting to define what preschool is in comparison to what daycares are, because I get called all the time to provide daycare services for a 2-year-old, et cetera. And it's just something as a preschool we do not do. But what we do offer is curriculum, and we follow the Wyoming Early Childhood standards. And I think it'd be really easy in the definition, perhaps put the kindergarten readiness aside and have that be more for the ESA, but defining preschool as, do you have a curriculum and or approved curriculum, and do you follow the Wyoming Early Childhood standards? Great, you're a preschool. Do you just offer childcare services? Great, you're a daycare. Because I just think we're making it more complicated than what it needs to be, and really allow the committee and the Department of Education to define kindergarten readiness with the cabinet that they have in place. That was just my suggestion. I would like to, perhaps after the next presentation, bring up the recommendations that were brought forth at the last JEC meeting in talking about a state office of early learning and our intent as a state on early childhood, because I feel like that state office of early learning could help drive some of this policy, and is a reorganization underneath the Department of Education to handle a lot of the definitions that we're seeking today: kindergarten readiness, early literacy, et cetera. And we don't have that as a state. Many states are implementing a state office of early learning that focuses on policies such as this. And I think that's a place to start rather than getting the cart in front of the horse. I do believe we have momentum behind this right now for the child development centers to move under a state office of early learning, TANF to move under a state office of early learning, perhaps the Head Start Collaboration Office to move under a state office of early learning, where you have these folks who are experts in the field. We are in the weeds of this, that can provide recommendations and policies to this committee that makes sense for early childhood. I feel that is the place to start, rather than willy-nilly or us giving recommendations on how preschool should be defined, how daycare should be defined, kindergarten readiness. Let's really work with the experts in the field, and we have a cabinet of early childhood that could support this. And so I don't know if this is the right time to bring that up, but we have momentum in doing this, and I would love to see that move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Anybody have any questions for Alicia? Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Elliot Regenstein from Foresight Law and Policy, and just wanted to underscore the point that Alicia was making. We were here, I know that there's not time to actually deal with it on today's agenda, but that we were here at the last meeting talking about a proposed funding formula for special education, and that there are a number of components that WDE has been working on, and we've got a small handout that we could share with the committee, and that this committee has dealt with a lot of systemic issues in early childhood over the years, and usually in the form of some combination of WDE, the governor's office, and the CDC's disagreeing with each other, and the committee being in a position to try to sort that out. And that we now have come to a point where, at least on certain issues relating to the early childhood system, we've got everybody on the same page. And I recognize that that doesn't mean anything if the legislature is not also on the same page, and that within this committee, there are a variety of views, and certainly outside the committee as well, but that just would underscore that whatever happens with the bill that was on today's agenda, which again, I think the discussion has been pretty rich, that we urge you to make some space to talk about some of those other issues at some point on a future agenda.
Questions for Elliot, comments? Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Welcome back. Please state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Roxanne O'Connor, Support Services Senior Administrator for Department of Family Services. I just wanted to call out one point that was made in regards to the early learning standards and the early learning guidelines that were mentioned in previous testimony. Those standards and guidelines, again, were developed through the Preschool Development Grant with the participation of the Early Childhood State Advisory Council. Those standards have been incorporated into the child care licensing rules. So every staff person in a child care program has to be trained on the ELS, ELGs, early learning standards and guidelines. Whether they're applied or not within the program isn't something that we qualitatively look at, right? And so we look and see, have all of your staff been trained on that? Yes or no? If so, you meet that training credentialing. So if it's the committee's will to look into that a little bit further and potentially incorporate that into the criteria for kindergarten readiness, I just wanted it to be known that there is already infrastructure and kind of a basis for that. We would then have to build capacity around what the actual application of those look like within the programs to be able to determine the preschool component of this bill and of the definition.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Roxanne? Comments? Anybody? All right, thank you very much for clarification. Anybody else? Public comment? Going once? Going twice? All right, we'll close public comment. Chairman Scott, it's your bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, basically, Mr. Chairman, basically, I think we need to carry it over. I really am not yet satisfied that we've got the kindergarten readiness properly defined. I mean, that needs more thought. I am afraid if we don't define it, we're going to wind up with something from the bureaucracy that is fairly generalized and may lead to some unfortunate consequences. But I do think we need that. And then I do think we need the consumer protection element because right now anybody can say that they've got a preschool and those words don't mean anything. And we're trying to, that's why we're trying to try it to kindergarten readiness. So I think that the bill as yet isn't ready for prime time. We could go in and amend a few things at this point, but Mr. Chairman, in view of the time, I'm not sure would be the best use of our time.
So, Mr. Chairman, you're in favor of postponing this until a November meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. And make a motion that we table it till November.
Okay.
Get a second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Oh, gonna have to have a show of hands. All right, all those in favor of tabling this until November, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see you. I see you up there on the board, yep. 2 of you. I got 6. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's a tie. Ties die.
Okay, so we're going to work the bill.
That's what that means. So,
Mr.
committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on the bill, move on page 7
lines 1 through 3, delete. That takes out the business of the having the certifying authority, which is DFS, work with this formally with the local school boards. I don't think that's needed.
Mr. Chairman, just trying to make sure that we stay in line. And I may have missed it. I apologize. Is there a motion to work this bill now, since the motion that I think we just voted on was to table it, but I don't, is there actually a motion on the table right now to work the bill?
Thank you, Representative Brown. There's not a motion yet to work the bill. Want to make a motion to work the bill?
Mr. Chairman, we ought to work the bill or we ought to carry it to November, one of the two. We've got a tie vote within the committee.
That's right. We got Representative,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead, Ocean.
I'd move to table the bill indefinitely.
All right, I think, okay, it's been moved. Seconded to table the bill indefinitely. We'll just have a vote on that, no discussion. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. 10. All right, all those in favor of not table or not postponing it, there we go.
I think it's opposed.
It's a yes, opposed to that. Okay, it is postponed indefinitely. There we go. All right. Let's take a short break, 10 minutes. We'll come back and we will jump into the National Institute of Early Education Research. Sorry, I think it's a good bill. I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I think
It needs to be done.
bring it back one way or another.
Put that in the general session, would you?
Yeah.
Not that I'll be there, but.
Yeah, will do.
All right, let's call this meeting back to order, please. Cowbell.
Cowbell's better.
There we go. Okay, we're back at it again, and now we're going to move into the National Institute of Early Education Research, or NEAR. Tate Mullen and Dr. Steve Barnett, and where did Michael Yin go? Do we need? Okay, the chair would like to recognize Representative Yin here and say thanks for attending. Go ahead, Tate.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I want to thank everybody here on this committee for taking up the topic of early childhood education, pre-K. We know how important it is, and this does come on the heels of House Bill 166, which was passed last session. And I believe I had conversations with almost everybody on this committee last session about my concerns, the pre-K component, in that if we want to do pre-K in the state of Wyoming, if we want that return on investment, we need to make sure, to Senator Scott's point, we need to make sure that we do it well. Luckily, we have with us today some experts in the realm of early childhood education research and policy that we can lay out what that might look like for the state as a policy option for you all for discussion. You know, education in the state of Wyoming is facing some significant challenges. At the top of some of your agenda items over the past couple of years has been student performance, specifically K-3 reading. Mental health has also been a significant issue in the realm of education and across our state. Talking to a number of SROs and police officers across our state and folks within the criminal justice system, it's a focus not just on the frequency, but the severity of incidents, not just in schools, but outside of our schools that are directly attributable to student mental health. We also have some worker shortage issues that we are looking at in the state of Wyoming. The Wyoming Economic Analysis Division just released a report that highlighted what looks to be a perfect storm in terms of our inability to retain our young graduates and the aging out population of the workforce that we are looking at over the next few years. Childcare in the state of Wyoming, that access and quality issue is incredibly prevalent. 79% of 3-year-olds and 72% of 4-year-olds across the state of Wyoming are unserved or underserved. We are one of only 6 states that does not have a state-funded high-quality early childhood education program. And this is one of the policy options that we are here to discuss with you today. And this is despite the return on investment that we know is attributable to that high-quality early childhood education system. And I need to be clear, these ROIs are only specifically attributable if we meet certain benchmarks and thresholds, which we will go over today. Those ROIs include reduced spending on special education, which is a significant cost escalator for education, higher graduation rates, higher grade level attainment, better student performance, including K-3 reading, a reduction in mental health presentations in students, more students into post-secondary education programs, reduced youth incarceration rates, reduced incarceration rates as adults, as well as reduced use of drug and alcohol. There's also a reduction in use of social safety net programs, TANF, SNAP, WIC, higher earnings as an adult. They're more likely to have employer-provided health insurance. This helps reduce the state's overall healthcare costs, higher state GDP, and increased state revenue. Along those economic indicators, according to the Center on American Progress, there is an economic cost to states without a high-quality early childhood education program that includes missed wages, individual family members being able to return to the workforce, as well as a loss of productivity for businesses. Annually, across the nation, this translates into $122 billion in lost revenue, $78 billion in foregone earnings for individuals and families, $23 billion in loss to employers for productivity as well as employee recruitment, retention, and training, and $21 billion in missed tax revenue. Now, while the need is clear, the path forward presents some challenges that this body has the potential to address. What the depth and breadth of the information presented at the June Joint Education Committee meeting highlighted was that, broadly speaking, what early childhood education system we do have is fragmented at best. Fragmented systems present substantial problems for data collection, systemic, policy, and programmatic evaluation, quality of services provided, accountability, accessibility, and equity, and produces turf battles that we've already seen being discussed among stakeholders, agencies, and departments over resources, management, and administration. There inevitably will be a cost discussion component to this. However, while we have this discussion, I want us all to do the best that we can to remember that if done right, these programs do provide a long-term ROI that can help to cover the cost of the program, as well as save the state significant dollars that are already being spent on the back end, whether that's for special education, court costs, social safety net programs, healthcare costs, lost wages for employees, and lost revenue for states and the state and businesses. There are a number of opportunities to disperse the initial cost of the program, including leveraging of state grant dollars through organizations like the Wyoming Community Foundation, Wyoming Women's Foundation, and others, leveraging of federal dollars, including enhancing the Head Start funding if we target 3-year-olds as well, the delay option for preschool under Parts B and C, and the Preschool Development Grant Birth Through 5 program under Every Student Succeeds Act. Like I said, to our advantage here today, we have with us 2 of the nation's leading experts on early childhood, high-quality early childhood education. Dr. Stephen Barnett and Dr. Ellen Freed are with the National Institute of Early Education Research out of Rutgers, and they will be able to share with you today not only the benchmarks the state of Wyoming should implement to provide a high-quality early childhood education program that delivers those results, but will also be able to answer many of your questions. And so with that, it is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Stephen Barnett and Dr. Ellen Freed.
Thank you, Tate. I'm Dr. Stephen Barnett. I'm an economist and one of the senior co-directors of the National Institute for Early Education Research. I've been working in this field for about 40 years, and I did the first really comprehensive benefit cost analysis of preschool education, high quality preschool, almost 40 years ago. I will lead the presentation in the interest of moving through as quickly as possible. But I also want Dr. Freedy to be introduced because you may have questions that need to be answered from her perspective.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Dr. Ellen Freedy. I'm the other senior co-director of the National Institute for Early Education Research. And I'm a developmental psychologist who was a preschool teacher, and I also oversaw the expansion of the high quality and effective preschool program in New Jersey, where we went from serving no children in public preschool except children with disabilities to serving over 50,000 preschoolers at high quality that has been proven effective through 10th grade at least.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. And so now I'm going to share my screen to facilitate the presentation. All right. So to begin, with some context, I'm not from Wyoming, but we study and keep track of every state at the Institute in an annual report, including Wyoming. Some context, you probably already know most of this, but just so we're on the same page. Wyoming has a decreasing school age population. In 2022, the birth rate in Wyoming was 21% below what it was in 2015. This creates a set of problems, long-term and short-term. Short-term for education, two of the problems are diseconomies of scale. As the population shrinks, it gets more expensive per child. And you sort of have a choice of, you can raise the cost per child or you can close schools. No one likes either one of those solutions. So another option is to think about, well, how would we increase the population in school? And 3 and 4-year-olds are an option for that. Wyoming does relatively well, does really well, actually, compared to other states on reading and math scores. But your scores have been on a downward trend for the past 5 years. Just 38% of the state's children are proficient in reading at grade 4, and reading actually slips down to the national average by grade 8. And if you look globally, we're far in not just Wyoming, but Wyoming and other states are far behind our biggest competitors in the global economy, like China. Future labor markets are going to demand greater knowledge and skills. What was adequate in the past is not going to be adequate in the future. AI and other technologies increase these demands. The returns to higher education and the gulf between people who have higher education and those who don't in terms of their earnings have been on a long-term widening trend. Wyoming needs to attract and grow high education, high pay industries to keep families in Wyoming. It needs the population that will attract them. Next challenge, economic mobility. That is the next generation going to be better off than the last generation economically? This is part of the American dream. Well, it turns out that doesn't, economics makes it clear, that doesn't depend just on individuals, although individual efforts are important. It also depends on what else is happening in the community you live in. And unfortunately, we're trending downward on labor force participation, marriage and two-parent families, health, longevity. These are not moving in the right direction. And investments in early education can address all 4 of those challenges. Right? So how might that be? Well, take the big picture. The birth to 5 environment, whether it's home learning, early education and learning programs, or the broader society, have a huge impact on early learning and development very broadly. Language, literacy, math, science, self-regulation. That is the ability to control myself and not just do what I wanted, it's partly attending to something I want to focus on, but the more important skill here for success in school is that I can focus on something somebody else, namely the teacher, wants me to focus on. And if you talk to teachers and parents, you'll realize there's a big problem today. Social and emotional development more generally, making friends, getting along with other people, habits and dispositions, creativity, physical health. All of these things we lay the foundation for in the first 5 years of life. And these do affect adult outcomes, physical and mental health, how long you will live, your educational success, socialization, how well you get along with other people, your coworkers, your employers, your citizenship, employment and income, parenting and family life, right? So early childhood is not the end all and be all, but it's an important period for setting into place the foundation that we want for folks to be successful throughout a lifetime. As you heard Tate say, Wyoming is one of just 6 states. Those are the states that don't have the blue to purple colors here. Just one of 6 states that don't have state-funded preschool, at least at age 4. You can see in the darker colors, states that essentially serve all of their 4-year-olds: Iowa, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Florida. They're hard to see because they're tiny, but Vermont and the District of Columbia also. And then a lot of other states, Texas, Wisconsin, Georgia, that are closing in on serving all of their 4-year-olds. You already heard Wyoming's very different, right? That about 10% of your 3- and 4-year-olds are served in Head Start, a larger portion of them in your early childhood special education programs. Outside of that, they might be in a local public school program, but in general, there's not a state-funded service for them. So what's the consequence of that? Well, less than 35% of 3- and 4-year-olds attend preschool in Wyoming. That's way below the national average of about 50%. And if we compare 2005 to 2019, that's pre-pandemic, because preschool enrollment went down during the pandemic, obviously. But before the pandemic, enrollment went down in Wyoming, when in most states it was moving in the opposite direction. So why should we care, right? So you set the foundation. Preschool programs aren't the only things that make a difference in young children's lives. Parents are very powerful. Communities are very powerful. The reason is that we have a substantial body of research that establishes there are positive outcomes from providing young children with high quality preschool programs. If we look across the nation, we look at 4th grade NAEP scores. States that have high quality preschool programs do better on 4th grade achievement, the reading and math that you care about. If we look at specific studies, and here I'm just going to point to a handful, there's a long running study in Tulsa, Oklahoma. High quality pre-K funded by the state in Tulsa, increased 3rd grade reading comprehension and 3rd grade numeracy. It led to better attendance, less grade repetition in high school. It increased high school graduation and college attendance. Estimated benefit cost ratio is 2.65. It doesn't matter whether that's exactly right. 2 to 3 times what they spent on the program is what the people in Oklahoma are getting back for their preschool program. Increased civic participation and voting. We can't put a dollar value on that, but obviously it's important. Another state that's invested in high quality pre-K, right? Tulsa did it through the public schools. Alabama has done it through an entirely separate state agency. They renamed their program from voluntary pre-K. And by the way, all of the state programs are voluntary. Nobody makes this mandatory. They renamed it First Class because I think, other than football, this is probably the thing that Alabama is most proud of what they do. A high quality program serves a large portion of kids in Alabama, has increased reading and math achievement from grades 3 through 7. Probably beyond that. It's a relatively young program, so we don't have data yet. New Jersey's pre-K program, another example. Dr. Freedy mentioned this. We have data through 10th grade. We're now embarking on studying the impacts through post-secondary education, but it increased reading and math achievement through grade 10. It decreased special education and grade retention. I'm going to give you some more data on that. And then we have lottery-based studies. Some school districts use lotteries for choice programs, other mechanisms to determine who gets to go to school where. This affects, in some states like Massachusetts, whether you get a high-quality preschool program. That's very similar to a randomized trial, and it gives us confidence. We can really believe that when we look at a preschool program and then look at what happened to kids decades later, that the increased college attendance, the increased earnings, was really due to the preschool program. So we have this strong evidence for this preschool program from these kinds of studies. This is a the result of a summary of the research literature. The yellow bar is the average impact. And you don't need to pay attention to the effect size. You can think of this as a percentage of the achievement gap that these programs might close for poor kids. So at the end of treatment, that yellow bar, all programs in the research literature, maybe they close half the achievement gap. And you'll see as you move later, this shrinks, right? These are pretty small effects from ages 5 to 10 and beyond age 10. As we move to the red bar says, well, what if it's a high quality program? And you can see those effects are about twice as large, whether it's immediate or persistent, right? Another piece of evidence that the quality of the programs really does matter. So what do we mean by that? Well, quality begins with high standards or high expectations. High expectations for what the kids should learn and be able to do, high expectations for what the teachers and staff in those classrooms should do with them. That starts with comprehensive early learning standards. You've heard about that today. Wyoming has comprehensive early learning standards. I haven't looked at a state that doesn't have good standards. The question is always, but do programs have the resources and the capability to do what the state actually says is good for kids? To do that, you need supports for strong implementation of a good curriculum. You need lead teachers who are highly qualified. We think that means a 4-year college degree, specialized training in early childhood, assistant teachers, team teaching, 2 adults in a classroom is the standard in early childhood. The assistant teachers need to have some kind of preparation, like a child development associate's credential as well. Staff professional development, you're not just prepared for the rest of your life when you enter a classroom. You need to continue growing and learning if you're going to be a good teacher or assistant. Maximum class size of 20, staff to child ratio no bigger than 1 to 10. We need to provide health screenings and referrals. If kids can't see, if they can't hear, they're going to have problems. We need to identify those problems when they're preschoolers, and we need to refer them to get the problems fixed. And then finally, we need continuous quality improvement systems, not some bureaucratic regulation system, but a system that puts supports in place so that programs are continually getting better. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the New Jersey example. All of that requires adequate funding. So this just gives you a sense of spending per child in what I call exemplar cases. These are all places that have high quality programs that either have evidence or are consistent with evidence of producing substantial gains. Now, there isn't one number on what you should spend per child in every state. Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, these are low-cost states. Adequate spending in those states is lower than it is in states like California or a place like DC, New Jersey, or Oregon. Our estimate for Wyoming is high quality full day, and by that I mean a full school day program, is something over $15,000 per child, right? That's lower than states like Oregon or New Jersey. It's about the same as California. It's higher than very poor states like Oklahoma or Alabama. So to make this concrete, I want to take an example from New Jersey. We began with a program that was for all kids in 31 high poverty cities. To give you some sense, in our state, that's a quarter of the kids in the state, right? So it's not a small, but it's the majority of our kids in low-income families live there. We started by setting high expectations for the kids and the teachers, by providing adequate funding, by requiring skillful teachers, as teachers with 4-year degrees and specialized training. Small classes, our maximum class size is 15. Integrated curriculum, other supports for children and parents, so they're family workers, for example, that support families that need this, and supports for teachers, right? So there's in-class coaching. If you're not doing it right, it's probably because you don't know how to do it right and you think you are. If someone doesn't come into your classroom as an expert and help you find your way, it's very unlikely you're going to improve. Now, I should tell you, this system in New Jersey works through the public schools, and the public schools are responsible for providing all these supports, but it's not provided entirely by the public schools. When we started, about half of the providers were Head Start, private, for-profit, nonprofit, faith-based. It doesn't matter in our state who runs the program. You meet the state standards, you provide good results for kids, high quality classrooms. If you're the Archdiocese of Newark or KinderCare, it doesn't matter, right? It's mom and pop. It's all about performance and not about auspice and meeting these standards. So what happened? So this shows you results on a scale where 1 is completely inadequate, 3 is minimal, 5 is good, and 7 is excellent. And the blue bars show you the distribution of programs. About 70% of the kids went to some kind of childcare preschool program before we instituted this change. And the blue bars show where they were. And the majority of programs were not good. And they didn't produce the results that we wanted. From 2000 to 2008, that entire distribution shifted from blue to green, moving from minimal to moderate, but not good, to good to excellent. So we took the teachers we had, the programs that we had, we added new teachers and new programs, but we took the ones who were there and we moved them by providing the resources into good to excellent. What were the results? Well, immediately at kindergarten entry, if we look at language and literacy, you can see the blue bars are the effects of 1 year, the green shows you the added impact of 2 years. Most years, 2 years are essentially doubling the impact of the program. And you could see long-term, the results are a little smaller, but they're still, maybe about 0.3. Another way of thinking about that is that somewhere between 1/3 and 3/5 of the achievement gap being closed for kids in these districts. And we look at mathematics, we see the same thing. The pattern looks like math impacts actually a little bigger. So this question of fade out when you have a high quality program, there's not yes, the effects are a little bit smaller later on, but they're not much smaller. They certainly don't disappear. Impacts on science, same thing. Notice the impacts of 2 years are about twice the impact of 1 year. Grade retention and special education. Grade retention, that kids who have to repeat a grade, was decreased by about 15 percentage points. Special education decreased by about 7 percentage points. So what are the takeaways from this? Right? So what does this mean for Wyoming? Well, Wyoming faces important challenges. Preschool can address those. The foundations for later success, especially in language and literacy, set in these first 5 years, preschool can make a difference. Unfortunately, relatively few children attend preschool or pre-K in Wyoming. Most parents, you saw my number, 15.6. Most parents can't afford that on their own, especially low-income families are going to be left behind. Declining birth rates increase the importance of investing in, we're going to have fewer kids. We need to make them more productive. Right? They're going to be providing for all of us older folks who are going to be retiring. And to decrease the total cost of the state budget in the future of all of those things that Tate mentioned. You have to have high expectations and standards if you're going to succeed. Most programs for young children, whether they're called childcare or preschool, do not have high expectations and do not have high standards, and they don't produce the kinds of impacts that I talked about. Achieving them requires strong teachers and adequate infrastructure, including a continuous improvement system that is something that that looks at data. Are our kids learning what they're supposed to be learning? Are you really teaching them math in preschool? If not, we need to get back on the bar and move forward. And we need coaching for teachers continuously to get them where they need to be. Other states have developed these high quality preschool programs that produce long-term outcomes. Look to them as guides. You don't have to invent this or recreate it. Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, right? There are lots of examples out there to choose from. We're proud of our state of New Jersey, but it's not the only one. There's certainly not just one way to do that. And then I have a set of resources. These are being provided to you for the research. If people want to look at the research evidence that backs those up. And I will stop sharing, and we are happy to stand for questions. Thank you, Chairman Northrup, Chairman Scott, and members of the committee.
Questions for Dr. Stephen
Mr. Chairman.
Barnett? Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
My question is, I'm having difficulty understanding what you mean by high-quality preschool. And looking at the slide on quality begins with high standards, you speak of comprehensive early learning standards. What are those? What are the specifics there that we should be looking for?
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start there, and we'll see if Dr. Freedy wants to add to this. I think that most of that is in the early learning standards that Wyoming already has, at least in terms of expectations for children. Now, I do find and I haven't looked at Wyoming specifically, but when I look at most states, they tend to get confused about what do we want to say kids should learn and be able to do, and what should teachers do to make that happen. And you need to set both of those out. But the first thing is understanding what it is you want for kids. And the most important, right, it's this very broad set of things that I talked about. It's cognitive, it's social, it's emotional, it's character building. And this is not a complicated thing. Like, be nice to others, respect your elders. These are not complicated things in terms of character. Take your turn. Right? Any preschool teacher could tell you what these are. But the most important things here really are these deeper things. While we want them to learn their alphabet and counting and all of that, there's only 26 letters. It's not that hard. Everybody learns them. But if you think about vocabulary, right? You're not really learning to read if you're sounding it out and you don't know what the words mean, right? So starting to build a large vocabulary, and that's a lifetime task. You are not finished with that at kindergarten or third grade or 10th grade, right? And social, right? Understanding myself, understanding other people and how to get along and work with them. Again, that's not going to be finished in preschool or kindergarten or even 10th grade. So it's these deep pools. Mathematics is the same way. It's not just about counting. Those deep pools are what's really important to make sure that you have indicators of those and it's happening.
Steve, I would just add, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman, I'm sorry, Chairman Scott, I apologize. I would just add that because I heard the earlier conversation, states do not use these to keep children out of kindergarten. they're used to guide the teaching and learning and the curriculum choices and the assessment choices so that you have a system where these are connected to each other. And I think what Steve was pointing out that's so important is that these need to be comprehensive and need to focus on these fundamental and foundational skills that set the stage for lifelong learning. And we see how critically important that can be in other states that have been successful with preschool.
Go ahead, Tate. Do you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, and I'd like to follow up on that as well and reiterate a little bit here in terms of those, in terms of those standards. One of the pitfalls that we have to be careful of is an overemphasis on, right, on your alphabet, on mathematics. Those are important and those are part of a comprehensive system. But when we're talking about that social emotional piece, what we're talking about is what has persisted down the line for our students and what our educators are experiencing today in those mental health presentations. If you as a child are thrown into a new context, right, with a teacher and all of these other kids, and you don't have the ability to regulate, if you live within that area of stress, right, that fight or flight response, because this is a new situation to you, you tend to act accordingly, right, which means you typically make bad decisions when it comes to your behavior within that classroom setting. That persists down the line when we're looking at the long-term ROI on these in terms of your ability to regulate and problem solve as a young adult, as an employee. It impacts turnover rate, right? Folks quitting jobs, being able to have higher paying jobs. So that piece is of great importance. And I think that there has typically been a lot of confusion about what that means. It doesn't mean that we don't focus on, mathematics or letters, but that the larger part of this is that it prepares them for that kindergarten classroom setting so that they can learn those things more effectively and efficiently. And one other thing that I'd like to add is that there's great success when you integrate those programs, right? So when you have that integration, it allows your kindergarten, your first and second grade teachers to then collaborate with those preschool teachers. Hey, in terms of this student, what are we looking at? It helps them to kind of look ahead, develop what skills they need to work on moving forward. Because again, it's not about kicking students out and turning them away, but really providing teachers the resources to help those students and provide them with what they need.
Senator Rothfuss, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Dr. Barnett. The discussion and the presentation is primarily based on high-quality, full-day pre-K. And we've seen and heard discussion on this committee that half-day has significantly lower effect sizes, but perhaps limited studies, is my understanding. That's honestly never made sense to me, and we haven't necessarily had a lot of detail or discussion on why that would be the case. I was wondering if you could provide comment on studies related to high-quality half-day pre-K versus full-day pre-K, and what the effect size would be associated with that half-day as opposed to a full day.
Go ahead, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. That's actually a tough question because there are so many things that vary. Right? We have one randomized trial that we did in New Jersey comparing half-day to full-day program that found substantially larger persistent effects. It's hard to be specific about just how much bigger are those. Well, the best I can tell you is bigger enough to make a real life difference in kids' school success and future lives. And there are a few other randomized trials, including of kindergarten, that give us similar answers. But there are so many other things that can vary. If you're just comparing half day and full day, that it's hard to get a better answer than that. I think part of the reason there are so few studies is that parent demand has been so powerfully in favor of at least a full school day, that the field that the providers have just moved in that direction, and they're not asking the question, because the answer is a whole bunch of people aren't even going to go if it's a half-day program, because you're not also meeting the childcare needs of the family. Any program, regardless of what it's called, has to pay attention to, are we meeting childcare needs of a family as well as the educational needs of the child? Not only does that full-day program better meet the educational needs, but it might, how do I pick up my kid in the middle of the day if I'm working? And the vast majority of our parents work, so they just opt out. And one of the biggest trends over the last 20 years has been this huge shift from part-day preschool to full day. And I think it's driven not just by the better education outcomes, but by the better meeting the needs of the family. The one thing I would add to that is if you've worked with preschool programs, let's take winter. By the time you get all of their winter stuff off and stowed, and then you want to go out and you got to put it all back on, go back out, there's not a lot of time left in the day if it's only 2.5 hours. And so there's just some real restrictions on what you can accomplish if you don't have at least a 6-hour school day.
Yep. Further questions for Dr. Stephen Mullen, Baron Barnett? Anything? Thank you, doctors. We appreciate you presenting. Thank you, Tate.
You're welcome.
We have public comment. Would anybody like to come up, comment on the National Institute of Early Education Research? Yes, please go ahead.
I just have one comment. I looked at.
Name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mary
Always.
Schmidt from Casper. I was just looking up our NAEP results, and as of 2022, we were 4th in the nation. So apparently the fact that we have less funding for early child development is not hurting our standards against the rest of the nation. So that should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we do have excellent scores on the NAEP. I think what was presented earlier is that some of the concern with that is that those scores go down from 4th to 8th grade and meet the national average. I think that there's plenty of other indicators that are tied to pre-K that indicate that maybe we can do a better job and save our state some money. So I just wanted to give that caveat that NAEP scores are great. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, educators. You're doing an excellent job. How can we better set up our kids for long-term success past high school?
Chairman Northrop, I would also indicate that if our scores are going down from 4th to 8th grade based off of the NAEP, then I would say that the early child development doesn't really play out through the entire 12 years of education because it drops after 4th grade. And I would not say that the data will give proof that the early child education carries us all the way through. It may get us to 3rd grade, but after that, it apparently doesn't have any impact on the academics of our students.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly contrary, though, to the data that was just shown, where they provide extensive details of through 10th grade, I think, and beyond. So we know we've got great NAEP scores, but we also know that if we have the propensity to decrease IDEA identification by 7%, for example. 7% decrease in that would be at least $35 million in savings, something in that ballpark, maybe more. So I understand the NAEP score analysis, but I believe our professionals here, Dr. Barnett and Dr. Fried, their data and extensive analysis shows the contrary.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, if I may, I would also say you don't have a strong, high-quality early childhood system, which may be why you're losing ground from 4th to 8th grade, or at least part of the answer.
Agreed.
Mr. Chairman, and if I could also add, because it wasn't probably clear in my slide, those lottery-based studies that find impacts on higher earnings, greater high school graduation, increased college attendance, would be consistent with your data in Wyoming. That is, they don't see persistent effects on achievement in those studies. I think where you do get the persistent effects in places like Alabama and New Jersey, the impacts are even larger. But child development and learning, it's not this simple linear process, right? Of, maybe I don't do better on my 8th grade test scores because I'm not that motivated to try in the 8th grade test. But because I went to preschool, I'm a lot more motivated to get into college and raise my future earnings because I believe in myself and I know I can do it. And so it's tricky to, it's not as simple. You have an impact here and then there, and it just doesn't work like that. It's more convoluted and complicated.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other public comment? All right, then we'll close public comment and move to committee directives. I have one. Can we get a copy or a link to the early learning standards that Wyoming has?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll get that sent out before lunch.
Excellent, that'd be great. Thank you. All right. Anybody else got anything they want to ask for?
Mr.
On the committee? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Did we want to do motions on bill drafts, et cetera, today, or is that something you'd prefer to do tomorrow?
You would, if we can do it today or tomorrow, it doesn't matter to me.
All right. Well, I think one thing, we've been discussing this for a long time, and first and foremost, what we would need to do would be to have funding for it. There's been a conversation for years of setting up some type of an endowment. Senator Scott and I ran a budget amendment, I think 4 years ago on that, and had legislation since. No matter what we do, no matter what we plan, we'll need to find a way to fund it. And I think the only long-term appropriate way to fund it is to set up an endowment, fill that endowment Hathaway style. Figure out over the years where we have excess revenue, and then develop over maybe the next couple of years, if we get that funded, the plan on how to spend the money. So even decoupling those. So the motion I would make would be a draft legislation for consideration at the next meeting to create a early childhood education endowment. And that legislation would not have to have any specifics about how to spend it, which I believe was how you did it with the Hathaway as well, where you set up the endowment and then you set up a working group, which we could do as well. I'd look to Senator Scott for the best way to structure that, because I know it was a two-step process for the Hathaway. And if we were to mirror that process, would we set up a working group or an oversight committee to establish how to spend the funds once the endowment was mature. But something along those lines, I think we need to start putting the money into an endowment to provide us with the opportunity to create a high-quality early education program. So I'd look to the co-chairman to see what his advice is on that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm probably going to disappoint you. My advice is not to go that route. What we're doing is looking for the best way to improve the ability of our students to succeed, because we're leaving, frankly, Mr. Chairman, too many of them behind. Even though our NAEP scores are good relative to everything else, the professional advice we've gotten based on our YTOP scores is that we're leaving too high a percentage of our kids not learning how to read adequately. And the preschool improvement is one tool to try to address that. There are other tools within the school system, and it's quite clear that some school districts are succeeding much better than others. So I don't think you want to do, I think you can get too specific in endowing a thing and tie your hands. So I don't think it's appropriate. I think this is part of the general ongoing operating expenses of running a school system. We do have an endowment there. It's known as the Common School Fund. And it doesn't reach the preschools, but it enables us to fund the basic school stuff. Mr. Chairman, I don't think setting up an endowment's the way to go here, because I think we need to have flexibility. Say, okay, we can get this much improvement by funding preschools, which we funded last time with the educational savings account approach. That's a perfectly good way to fund a preschool if you're going to. So do we want to expand that? How do we want to handle that end of it? But I don't think an endowment's the way to go, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roth, please go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not suggesting that we provide all of the details on what the appropriate use of those funds are, but as Chairman Scott noted, the Common School Permanent Land Fund and our School Foundation Program funds can't be used for pre-K. So we need a funding source. With the ESAs, we literally just funded that out of the general fund. And one of the criticisms of that legislation is that it's just funded out of the general fund, that at some point when budgets are cut, there won't be funding available for that, and that ESA program will get cut or eliminated. The idea here is if you're going to have an early childhood education system, you have to maintain funding for it. We can't ad hoc it year in, year out to see if we've got some leftover general funds available, and oh, this year it looks like we'll have preschool. Next year might not. We'll see how it goes. In the past, the way we've addressed that is to do something like an endowment where in the good times, where we'll probably have a significant budget surplus, and I know we've got about $2 billion in unrealized capital gains right now in our investment portfolio. So we have the money available. It would just be a commitment by the legislature to say, all right, we'd like to use some of that money in perpetuity to support early childhood education. And again, it doesn't have to be carved out right now. I think the appropriate approach is to put together a group of experts to figure out what an appropriate use of any funds available would be. So if we had a $500 million endowment yielding $20 million a year, what would be the best use of that? If we got that up to the point where it was $1 billion and we were yielding $40 million a year, what would be the appropriate use for that? So I'll make the motion then for next time to draft legislation to create that endowment. I don't think we need a price target at this point in time on what that would be. We'd have to learn a little bit more. And then incorporate in that legislation the creation of an early childhood education advisory committee to come back and provide recommendations on what program we would build that those funds would go to as they grew. I hope that motion's clear. I'll look over to staff to see if that motion's clear.
Okay, moved and seconded that we draft legislation for an endowment and incorporate early childhood advancement committee. Go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment on the revenue picture. So we know that natural gas prices are down, coal production is down. We may have unrealized capital gains, but they are unrealized. And so I would urge us to be cautious. I think early on, we had a estimate of this program costing around $415 million. And I don't remember if that was a yearly basis or a biennial basis, but we've had this discussion before about the cost of this program. And so I would just urge us to vote this motion down. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Forenza, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we've been hearing, we don't have the money, this problem's too big, and we've been talking about all the benefits of this for years. My entire time in the legislature, we've spent hundreds of hours on this topic probably in recent years. And we have yet to produce a real solution. And we can hem and haw, and we can talk about all the nitty-gritty details and come up with something that is gonna work out maybe 10 years from now. But as we saw, legislatures change all the time, and we need to show the people of Wyoming, the hardworking people of Wyoming, that we are investing in their future, that we want to invest in Wyoming's hardworking families. And we can work out the details as we build our endowment, but it's time to do something. I'm sick of coming to this committee and talking about the things that are so good and then we don't do them. So I think the least we can do is start working towards a goal, an end point, have an endowment, have an end game that we can get to and say, look, people of Wyoming, we worked hard and we showed up for you. But if we go home and we don't have any solution, we don't have any ideas, and we're gonna keep saying we don't have the money, we've got more money than we've had. And we might have more money right now than we will in the future. So it's time to do something. So I would urge this committee to support the hardworking people of Wyoming and the future of our state. We need young families to stay here, and they can't if they don't have opportunities to keep them here.
Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the bill we passed last year on the in the education savings is something in this area that's what, quarter or a fifth of that, the money appropriated there is for preschool. There's the approach that we've been able to pass. So I would suggest that we have been doing something in this area. We did it last time, it's appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown has his hand up online.
Oh, great. Thank you. I didn't see it. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't disagree with Representative Provenza's statements in any way, shape, or form that it gets kind of tiring bringing ideas forward and then not being able to, produce something of substance. What I will tell you, though, is something that we just discussed in select school facilities last week up in Jackson, and that is I'm at the point now where we just saw a drastic change in our primary elections on what the people of Wyoming are looking forward to and what the people of Wyoming want us to do as we move forward into the next legislature. And what I don't want to do is see what we just had happen with poor Talise Hansen's bill that we had her draft last time, and it got postponed and tabled indefinitely by this committee. I don't want to see the exact same thing happen in a brand new legislature where we have staff time, committee time, and hard work put into something that is going to be put on a back burner and absolutely nothing is going to be done with it. So I guess, in my opinion, I think that the idea of drafting a bill and moving us forward with an endowment for public education, which was really a referendum in this past election, it seems to me that there's not an interest in the state of Wyoming's populace that voted that they want to continue to support public education. They want to continue putting the money into the ESAs, and they want to continue putting money into the charter school systems. And the public education system, at least from what I heard going around, is that it's overly funded, and we're going to put something else into the public education system that is not going to hear the light of day when it hits the Senate or the House floor and gets put to a committee vote. So I will be a no vote on this motion, just because I don't think that I can support putting our staff into this process and then having us just table a bill again starting in our November meeting. So I'll be a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Brown. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the Wyoming State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Megan Degenfelder. Nice to have you here. Representative Provenza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to respond to my good colleague. Yeah, the election has had a different outcome than maybe some people were looking for, and maybe it showed that there's a change in how the state of Wyoming is going to move forward, but I will also say that voter turnout was extremely low. And maybe because we haven't articulated a vision for the state of Wyoming that people feel inspired to go vote for. Let's give them one.
Further discussion? Anybody? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the discussion. A couple of points. First, with regard to the bill draft, I'm always sensitive to that, and I think this committee understands that I'm sensitive to that. This is an easy bill draft. This is a 3-pager. So I don't think it's of the magnitude that we just saw where you have to go through statutory revision, because setting up an endowment, again, it's very straightforward. I don't think that's going to take a substantial amount of time. And I think when we're talking about something of this magnitude, trying to put aside hundreds of millions of dollars so that we can support in perpetuity for the hardworking people of the state of Wyoming early childhood education, that's worth the effort, that's worth the discussion, that's worth learning more about. We have just talked about this for as long as I've been in the legislature as well, 14 years. And while we provided a small amount of funding in a one-time general fund budget for the ESA, that's going to have to be funded every budget. And again, this is an opportunity for a short-term solution for some people in the state, a small number of people, to have more affordable access to early childhood education through the ESA. That is not the same as providing an opportunity for everyone in the state to have affordable access to early childhood education that is high-quality education. It's a very different thing. For as long as I've been on this committee, early childhood education has been identified each and every time we've gone through this discussion as the single most significant thing we could do to improve education in the state of Wyoming based on the system we have. The most cost-effective, the most influential. And again, when we look at it, the data shows that it ends up being a net cost saver to the state. Not to the program is an expense, but when you look at the effect that it has on, for example, special education, decreasing our special education budget by 7% would be significant. I don't have that number in front of me, but I think we spend over $500 million a biennium. I could look at Matt, he could probably tell me exactly what 7% of our special education budget would be. It would be quite significant. We know that even if it goes out to affect incarceration rates, where we spend a tremendous amount of money. We have to start somewhere with the funding side of it, and we have to come up with a plan. It might take a while to fully create an endowment to the point where it funds a full-day, high-quality pre-K for all students. That might take 10 years to get that funded. It might take 15 or 20. It really does depend on the revenue picture, as Senator Steinmetz mentioned. We don't know exactly what we'll have. We don't know how much we'll have to spend. That's an appropriate topic for debate. How much can we squirrel away this year? When it starts generating revenue, we can build. We've done this in other places. We have done this with the Hathaway, which is one of the best programs that we've created for the state, endowing that. Imagine if the Hathaway were a general fund budget appropriation program. Imagine if that's how we funded it instead of a permanent endowment. I mean, would we have any Hathaway dollars available this year? Would we have 3 years ago? We probably would this year, right? Everyone gets a scholarship this year. 3 years ago, I'm sorry, we don't have any scholarships. Coal's down. We know the nature of our revenue. We know the nature of our economy, and we understand that it does not come in steady streams. It ebbs and it flows. The only way we will tackle this problem is through an endowment. It's the only way it's going to happen. We don't have a constitutional obligation to fund it because it's not part of the K-12. As such, it's going to take an endowment to come up with a program that can be permanently funded. And then it's going to take coordination, right? There's more work that needs to be done. But if we don't have the money there, what are we going to coordinate? I urge the body to support this so that we can continue the conversation. A vote of aye today is not a vote for the bill. A vote of aye today is a vote that, yeah, this is important. This is worth our time at the November meeting to give some thought to it. And I think we should take that time because this is a critical issue for the people of Wyoming. Only 4 states lack this type of program. We wonder why our children leave the state and raise families somewhere else. I don't wonder why. I don't spend a lot of time wondering that because it's our lacking of programs and support like this that make a better life in other states for young families, and then we can't rope them back. This is exactly the type of thing that we need in place to be able to build families here, let them build lives here, and let them continue to thrive in the state of Wyoming. Let's vote aye on this for the bill draft, not necessarily for the bill itself. Let's get a bill draft. Let's discuss it next time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Any comments? None appearing, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the bill draft signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed? No. I think we're gonna have a show of hands. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. All right, all those against? That motion's failed. Okay. Any other committee directives? Okay, we'll move on. We're at K-3 literacy, the Imagination Library Program. Dickie Shaner, Shelley Hamill. Anna Reyes, Noreen or Nora Briggs, Representative Mike Yin.
Mr. Chairman, I think Department of Education is going to let me speak, and then if they want to provide any context on after that, I think they will.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, Ms. Briggs wanted to give a presentation to you guys. She had time during a layover because, so Ms. Briggs is the executive director of the Dollywood Foundation, so Dolly Parton's nonprofit. She was in a layover celebrating the statewide program in both Missouri and Kentucky for the Imagination Library Program. Unfortunately, because of our delay, she had to get back on her plane for her next flight. So I'm going to read what she had prepared, and then I'll add some thoughts afterwards. And so then, again, these words are from Ms. Briggs. Dolly sends her greetings and thanks you for considering expansion of her Imagination Library Program across Wyoming. We agree that nothing is more basic, more essential, and more foundational to a child's success in life than the ability to read. The research and science is very clear. We cannot wait until kindergarten for children to have access and exposure to books and reading. We need to reach children early. Reading at this age happens primarily at home. Reading at home requires books. Not all families have access nor can provide books, and we can help here. Dolly Parton's Imagination Library is a contactless home book gifting program for children 0 to 5, receiving an age-appropriate, high-quality book with their name on it monthly at home at no cost to the family. Books in the home lead to increased kindergarten readiness, changes in the home literacy environment with families connected around books and all family members reading, leads to significantly stronger reading, math, and science and academic achievements in 3rd grade and beyond. We want children to fall in love with reading, keep them reading for fun in middle school and beyond. The easiest time to create a love of reading is when they are very young. We know that simply getting books into the home changes the trajectory of kids, families, and communities. A statewide program provides more benefits to a state than a collection of local programs. So in Wyoming, there are some county-level programs with county-level program partners that do implement it on a county-by-county basis, but not across the entire state. And there are many counties across Wyoming that do not have access to these books right now. And so the county-level program partners in a statewide program would ensure coverage for all zip codes and equitable access for all families to early learning resources. Children start kindergarten with a shared experience and help have a level playing field. This creates a shared bond with children across neighborhoods, race, and economic differences and helps break division. We partner with state agencies to find the most vulnerable children in underrepresented families, and there will be a special program for foster care children, babies born in correctional facilities, or into a family whose parents are incarcerated or in a facility, or partner with WIC. Partnership with state birthing hospitals to enroll at birth, partnership with the State Department of Education to flag Imagination Library participants and track both participant and program effectiveness return on investment. And they also partner with state and local library system and increases library use for all families. And ties to the adult literacy and dual language program places a multi-generational focus on literacy as the best way to learn to read or to learn a new language, as the best way to learn to read or learn a new language is a children's picture book. So we can connect the programs, books at home, and books in the adult classroom. The opportunity to layer on other family resource programs, so things like book buses into communities, or partnerships with food and medical nonprofits, or partnering with Parks and Rec, to create storybook trails, to use Imagination Library books in tandem with trails. The state program would also work across the state to fundraise and help local communities so there are never children on a waiting list. And if there's a budget deficit in the coming year, the state program could work to raise money to have mitigation funds to ensure that the program can continue. A statewide program ensures equitable access, and it provides increased opportunity for increasing statewide kindergarten readiness and academic achievement, and creates a focus on literacy. This program is special. Dolly calls this her heart program. It's about connecting hearts in the families, connecting them to each other, snuggling and cuddling together, connecting hearts to books and reading. Dolly wants to create a love for books and reading and make sure that every Wyoming child has equitable access to books and learning and provide the start they need in education and life. So to provide some context, the Imagination Library is a 0 to 5 book program for every single child in a statewide program. You have the flyers in front of you. The cost is very, very low. Some states do 100% match where the state funds all of the books 100%. The program that I'm suggesting is a 50% match, so you get 50% by the state and then 50% each local program participant raises money to provide that other 50%. There's some suggested language, but I would actually suggest if we do implement the program, that we ask LSO to partner with the Department of Education to figure out what language works right for the state of Wyoming. But my goal here is to have something that 21 states already do, and again, the newest states that Dolly Parton literally just visited to celebrate their grand opening was in Missouri and Kentucky. So it's across any partisan divide. It really is the focus of making sure those 0 through 5 kids start school with a love of learning and a love of reading. And with that, I'll take any questions and bump it over to Department of Education if they have anything.
Let's hear from the Department of Education first. Ms. Hamill, would you like to expound on your side?
Chairman Northrup, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. I don't think we have anything to expand on, just here to answer questions if you have any.
All right. Okay, questions from the committee. Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Yin, for presenting. I was at the Education Commission Estates recently in Kentucky. This program got a lot of attention, a lot of great reviews, so thank you for bringing it. Wondering, what do you see as the local partners looking at, like for the 50/50? Do you have some examples of what that would be?
Sure. So I know in Teton County, our local partner is the Teton Literacy Center. And so they focus on child literacy, especially in cases where they need a little bit of help to making sure that they can get up to the grade level they need for reading. I believe Sheridan County actually partners with their local library. So it's a broad range of partnerships across the counties that do have it. And that would be the kind of groups, what usually some sort of educational nonprofit or a library system could partner to provide that other 50% or fundraise that other 50%.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this program is used worldwide now, and the cost of it was unbelievably low for what you get. Do you have any cost estimates of what the program looks like?
Representative Yen.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe it is in the flyer that you have where the cost on a per child, per program, per month is $2.20. And then it comes up with an estimate of if we enrolled 65% of the 0 through 5 population in Wyoming, in the year where we get up to, in a 2-year basis of the start of the program, it'd be about $608,000. So that's the price of the books and getting the state level program up and running. So really, I mean, frankly, a drop in the bucket to really get our kids on a good start for learning.
Questions? Anybody else have any comments? Questions? All right. Thank you for presenting. We're now going, according to the agenda, to 25 LSO 0094, which is reading assessment intervention with Tanya Hytrek and Shelley Hamill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Tanya Hytrek with the Legislative Service Office. This is agenda item number 4, 25 LSO 94, Reading Assessment and Intervention, Committee Formal Draft 1.1. Recall this was requested at the last meeting, the June meeting of this committee, and the directive was to incorporate the superintendent's literacy cabinet's recommendations. I would note at the outset, some of those recommendations were modified at the direction of the chairman. We had conversations about a couple of those. In those instances, there are staff notes contained in the bill draft. The bill amends Wyoming Statute 213401, which is the statute governing the Reading Assessment and Intervention Program. It's worth noting that that initial statute was enacted in 2001. Through Chapter 189. Page 1, line 12 through page 6, line 12 contains the amendments. If you look at subsection A, which begins on page 2, lines 1 through 22 contains an amendment to strike the word instrument and replacing it with the word instrument and replacing it with the word instruments, plural, on line 3. I would draw the committee's attention to page 2, line 19, as well as the staff comment on page 3, lines 1 through 27. When you look at that language at the bottom of the page, there are 2 sentences. The first begins on line 16, the program. And if you read those 2 sentences in context with the Department of Education's request, which was to insert after the first sentence, the intervention system shall be administered to any student with reading difficulties, kindergarten through grade 3. It's inconsistent with the immediately preceding sentence. The law currently requires that evidence-based core curriculum align with statewide student content and performance standards for all students. Secondly, it requires that a multi-tiered intervention system be administered to reading difficulties. The chairman requested that the staff include the staff comment for purposes of committee discussion. Inclusion of the recommendation will require additional revision to ensure that the requirements are consistent. Subsection B, beginning on page 3, line 30 through page 4, line 14, contains notification requirements for school districts and advising parents, and requires individual reading plans for those students that do not show appropriate reading competency. If you turn on to page 4, lines 6 and 7, you'll note that this strikes the permissive language referencing inclusion of a group reading plan that is currently authorized to be utilized in individual reading plans. It's important to note this doesn't specifically prohibit group reading plans, but it does eliminate the permissive reference. Page 4, line 16 through page 6, line 12 contains subsection C. This contains the reporting requirements, and note on page 4, line 22 through page 5, line 1, and then again on page 5, line 7, it inserts or assessment after screening, and this is a conforming amendment to match the language in previous subsections. Turning to page 6, line 7 through 12 shows stricken language to eliminate reporting requirements related to student-teacher ratios, certified tutors, and instructional facilitators trained in the delivery of K-3 evidence-based instruction. I would note, and I think this is stated actually in the staff comment on page 6, lines 14 through 23, this was noted by the Department of Education's Literacy Cabinet as a potential deletion. We've included it for purposes of discussion. Page 6, line 26 contains the effective date, and that is July 1st of 2025. There is an important staff comment on page 7, lines 1 through 7, and at the chairman's directive, one of the recommendations from the Literacy Cabinet was to replace program with system. That's not a substantive change, and generally, when we modify statutes, we do so to effectuate a change or clarification. And there's really not a difference between program and system, and in our opinion, changing it to system further complicates the distinction between what is required for all students and what is required for those students with reading difficulties. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, do you have any questions on the bill draft? None? Pretty much cleaned it up. All right. Do you wish to comment on anything, Ms. Hamel?
Mr. Chairman and Committee, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. No, I don't have, I have one question on the top of page 2, line 3, where it strikes the concept of, the sentence says, an intervention program that uses an instrument and changes that to instruments. Would it be beneficial? I think the cabinet's concern with the use of instrument was that it sounded like it limited the district to using just one instrument from the list, and in reality, districts use many screening and assessment tools. So we wondered about potentially inserting one or more in front of instruments.
Okay, thank you. I have that wrote in.
Okay, and with that, I'd stand for any questions. Thank you.
Anybody have questions for Ms. Hamel? Thank you. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Oh, wait, we have to have public comment. Public comment. Public comment on the bill. Please state your name and who you represent.
Hi, my name is Jamie Lean. I'm a resident of Natrona County. I want to encourage the committee to really look at putting phonics into this so that if you want to get really behind the legislature to involve with students to get their reading scores and their literacy comprehension up, you need to include phonics. So if we're going to amend the state standards, I recommend that we add phonics in there. I stand open for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Just to address that, that is in this portion of statute, phonics and phonemic awareness. It's just not in what we see right here. We added pretty substantial revision to include those concepts, I want to say 3 years ago. So perhaps offline, we can point you to that so that you can read that a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Public comment? None appearing, will close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Senator Rothfuss, seconded by Senator Brennan. Any comments on the bill? Does anybody want to look at page 2, line 3, and add one or more instruments?
Yeah, one or more. So moved. Move to amend one or more instruments.
Okay. That additions to add the words one or more in front of the word instruments. Any comments? None appearing, will proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Wait. If the motion is to introduce the bill, the roll call, if it's to carry over to next time, it doesn't.
Oh,
We're on the amendment.
We're on the amendment.
On the amendment.
Yeah, that was on the amendment.
All those opposed? We have added in the words one or more in front of the word instruments on line 3, page 2. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add or talk about? Question on the bill? I believe that's roll call, right?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 94, reading assessment and intervention amendments as amended. Senator Beitman? Senator Brennan? Aye. Senator Rothfuss? Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Representative Allred?
Excuse.
Representative Andrew? Representative Berger?
Excused.
Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Clausen?
Aye.
Representative Lawley?
Aye.
Representative Obermueller?
Aye.
Representative Provenza?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Scott?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Northrup?
Aye.
You have 12 aye and 2 excused.
Thank you. Okay, committee, I think we should go to lunch. Maybe we ought to make it a short lunch. We have an hour and a half in the agenda. We're behind schedule a little bit, so. We're on schedule? Okay, you're right. Okay, so we'll be back here at 1 o'clock.